Good afternoon and welcome to today's Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Gary Kolb and I'll be secretary for today's meeting. Next slide. Before we begin with the formal proceedings of the meeting, I'll just go through a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being live streamed over the FAA's YouTube channel. And it will also be recorded and be available for viewing in the future on the FAA's YouTube channel. Please remain muted during the presentations. After each briefing, there will be an opportunity for all the members to ask questions and engage with the briefers. If you're on Zoom and participating virtually, we ask that you raise your hand using the Zoom command, and one of the moderators will call on you to speak. The FAA team is monitoring the live stream, so if you do have issues, just post the issue in the comments and we'll try and take care of it. Next slide. Today's meeting is being held in accordance with the Federal Aviation Advisory Committee Act. This advisory committee meeting is open to the public. Notice of the meeting was published in the Federal Register on August 8th, 2023. Members of the public may address the committee with prior approval of the chair. This should be arranged in advance. Only appointed members of the advisory committee may vote on any matter brought to a vote by the chair. The public may present written material to the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee at any time. And that completes the official statement. Next slide. I'll go through a quick agenda. After the agenda will have some opening remarks from our designated federal officer and ACT chair. We have two presentations. These are the FAA's responses to the Aviation Advisory Committee's recommendations from Task Group 14 and Task Group 15. We'll take a short 20-minute break and then go into our afternoon session. We'll have an information briefing on waivers and exemptions. We have an opportunity to present some new taskings to the committee, and then we'll open up to the chair to open up for the committee members to address any new business or any future agenda topics they want to share. And then we'll end the day with some closing remarks and final thoughts. Before I turn it over to our designated federal officer, I do want to present a motion for the accept the minutes from the April 26, 2023 meeting. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have here a second?
Second.
Okay. Any objections? Okay. Well, if no objections, the minutes from the April 26, 2023 ACT meeting are approved. Okay. With that, Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me online without the mic? Do I need a mic?
You do not need a mic. Okay.
We'll use the mic. First of all, thank you all for joining us today. This is my first AAAC meeting, and I'm delighted to be here. And some of you I know, some of you I haven't had the chance to meet, but I look forward to working with you going forward. I want to thank Houston Mills, chair of the committee, for allowing me to be here with you today, and also to acknowledge Jeffrey Vincent and his team for the incredible work that they do in advancing drone integration, as well as our folks from our NextGen office who are spread around the room, who are helping us work both on UAS integration and AAM more generally. Some of you may know me from my time at DOT or FAA in the past, but for those of you who don't know me, I want to tell you a little bit about what animates me personally and professionally. I am a long distance runner. I don't say that to impress anybody, because if you've ever watched me run, it is definitely not impressive. But I ran my first marathon at age 40, and I'm about to run my 30th marathon this year. And what it's really done is given me an outlet from the stress of work. I don't listen to music. I think, I observe nature, I take in the moment, but also taught me a lot about perseverance, taking on challenges, gathering information, solving problems. It doesn't matter how hard the race is. I will say I probably learned more from my worst races than I have from the ones that came easily, but taught me something about perseverance, determination, focusing on outcomes, not just staying in the moment. Also taught me a lot about gathering information from others to help me on my journey, whatever that journey is. So talking to friends about, I'm having cramps, or I don't like this kind of goo, is there something else you recommend? But it really has also been the way I approach work and working with colleagues, which is sort of collaboratively identifying the objective, working on options that will put us on the path for successfully completing what the task is, and constantly looking to take on new challenges, to learn more about myself, about the organization, and build for the future. And I think that is sort of reflected in the way that I approach work every day in engagement with my colleagues, whether they're internal or external to FAA. And we are all working in a space that 15 years ago most of us could never have dreamed of. And I had the pleasure, I guess I'd say, of being chief counsel of FAA at the time Congress passed its reauthorization in 2013. That had a whole host of mandates for UAS integration. Many of you will remember that one of the first things we were charged with doing was identifying test sites where we could test some of these technologies. And at the White House, at the time, the White House, don't know who it was within the White House, but it was the White House, said FAA can't move forward until you figure out how you're going to manage privacy. And a lot of folks at the FAA, including people in counsel's office, said, well, we're a safety efficiency organization. We don't deal with privacy. There's nothing we can do here. And that was not satisfactory, because if that were the case, we weren't going to be able to move forward to identify these test sites, fund them, and start operations. So we did exactly what I described before. We did outreach across the federal government, to external stakeholders. How should we be thinking about this? Are there opportunities for us to integrate privacy, even though we don't have the legal authority? And over the course of several months, we ultimately concluded that engagement and outreach were the solution. So we would publish a notice, public hearing, to say, how should we think about privacy in these contexts? We were doing contracts with test sites, so we could ask them to have a privacy plan and public engagement. So even though we didn't technically have the legal authority, we were able to build it in, find a solution that allowed us to move forward with what our technology and integration goals were. We had a similar situation when it was close to Christmas, and we knew there were going to be a large number of people buying small drones for their families and friends for Christmas, and we had no way of identifying, who own these vehicles. If there were a crash, and there had been one into the stands at the U.S. Open tennis tournament, how we were going to identify these and trace them back to the operator to kind of enhance safety. And so we came up with what we thought was legally supported, was the drone registration of drones. And a modest registration fee, so that there was a license and there was traceability. Ultimately, we were sued in court and lost, but Congress, a bipartisan Congress, saw the wisdom in that mechanism as a way for traceability, and ultimately enacted legislation. So I really think this is incumbent of all of us to think creatively, and focus on what the outcomes are that we want to achieve. And even though there are many, many cooks in the kitchen, and I think that's a plus, stay focused on the objectives, be willing to course adjust as we learn more information and look for new solutions. I also have to say, I was in private industry for a number of years, where we also worked on developing a drone program. David Carpin, I had the chance to work with David for about 1.5 years before I left. And also got some valuable experiences from being on the side of the private sector. All this goes to the basic point that we need your input, we need your wisdom, we need you to raise your hand when you see problems, we need you to suggest solutions, and together we'll figure it out. I'm truly excited that I do believe UAS and AAM integration will help make the future of aviation sustainable, safe, equitable, and drive economic growth across this country. We hear it a lot about climate and sustainability, but as those of us who know who've been working in airspace this summer, Frank, I'm looking at you, it is very real, and I think UAS and AAM have a real opportunity to help us reduce our environmental footprint and put us on a path to net zero emissions from federal operations by 2050, and your work is a significant contributor to that. Obviously, we couldn't get where we want to go without being safe. So your advice on the strategic framework for near-term AAM operations helped us put pen to paper and knock out the details of our AAM implementation plan, which you saw we released not too long ago. But we know that plans on paper are just the start, and that's why we are looking at opportunities to test things in different ways, including a UTM key site operational evaluation. So far, we have 5 companies that have agreed to test out what it looks like to navigate drone traffic below 400 feet, and we're looking forward to others joining this program. But a successful partnership really is going to take getting everyone to the table from every background, every different perspective to identify the opportunities and the challenges. When we look at things from different perspectives, we can find solutions that we might not have ever dreamed of. Anyway, I'm glad to be here today and look forward to the discussion and an opportunity to continue to work with all of you going forward. And I will turn it over to Houston.
All right, let's give Katie a big round of applause. Welcome. Well, I tell you, just really excited to be here again. Welcome, Katie, Mr. DFO, Jeffrey, and team. Thank you all for all the coordination. Certainly appreciate the work with Tracy, Gary, and just all the staff on setting everything up. For those of you that are here virtually, welcome. We see most of you, and we'll try to make sure we see your hands go up when we get into the engagement phase. For those of you who were able to travel here to DC, welcome to this nice weather. It's very much nicer. Kevin and I were talking about the temperature in Texas. It's pretty hot, but nice and cool here. So, great to be somewhere where it's not smoking hot. Great opportunity today to really review a couple taskings that the team did some excellent work on. Looking forward to the feedback from the FAA on Task Group 14 Beyond Visual Line of Sight, as well as the community engagement that Kanji and team led on TG 15. And so those should be good. But recently, there's been a lot of activity going on. I think that should excite us all. And O'Brien, you and the team collaborate with the FAA, most recently on the FAA UBSI drone and AAM symposium. A lot of good information going on out there. One of the key takeaways, that I walked away with is things are moving fast. And had the opportunity to sit on a panel and really, speak about some of the great things that the AAAC, formerly the DAC, has been able to support the FAA and along with their strategic and tactical plans. And reflecting back on some of those contributions that we made was a great source of pride. And I think as we see FAA reauthorization that's coming out, things continue to move forward with Innovate 28. The strategic roadmap just came out. Our recommendations in terms of how the short-term enhancements, some of those were included. Very exciting that this group and all the expertise and all the support as we're providing feedback, the FAA is incorporating that in many ways. And to me, that's a great source of pride. The NPRM for Beyond Visual Line of Sight, is in the works, right? And that's coming out in the not too distant future. And we know that's a source of pride for all of us as well. So I say all that with this in mind, and that is we'll go through the feedback from the FAA, but then we're going to have a period, I think, to have some great thought leadership as we continue to think about what are those things, given everything that's going on, that we believe we can help the FAA as stakeholders from around the country, from different groups, with incredible thought leadership on how do we help the FAA advance the system and move it forward so that we, in America, lead the world. And there's a lot of pride that goes along with the opportunity, just to be part of that. And so just want to say, looking forward to your input, looking forward to the feedback from FAA, and really just want to thank everyone for all your contributions that you made thus far and what's going to come forward, because there's a lot of work to be done. So with that, I'll turn over to Jeffrey for the continuation.
So good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to the AAAC Task Group 14 members for providing the recommendation to the FAA for Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee for opportunities to bridge the gap between the ARC's recommendation and the BVLOS rule. Our success depends upon collaboration with the aviation industry as we seek to balance the public's needs for solution, industry's drive for innovation, and the FAA's regulatory mandates. Next slide. Next slide. In November of last year, the AAAC Group 14 was tasked to review the BB ARC's final report from March 2022 to recommend how FAA can expedite BB drone operations in advance of the BB rule. Task Group 14 offered 6 interim recommendations for FAA in an effort to provide relief, clarity, and consistency to industry, and those recommendations are listed here on the slide. Next slide. The FAA is committed to providing the safest, most efficient airspace system in the world, and we're taking steps toward accelerating BB operations for drones. We are focused on accelerating the review and approval of BB waiver and exemption requests. On May 25th of 2023, we published 5 Federal Register notices to seek public comment on 4 petitions for exemptions to conduct BB operations, and 1 on broader BB policy topics, largely stemming from the BB ARC recommendations. The FAA is evaluating the published comments, which will inform BB rulemaking and the conditions and limitations for the exemption petitions. Next slide. FAA recognizes the challenges industries face with regards to BB regulatory approval, and we're working hard to streamline our process, and we are committed to improving our responsiveness. FAA is currently examining the 4 exemption petitions, and we expect decisions soon, and they will help with future petitions. We have seen gains in our process efficiency and throughput as we reassess the risk of more complex operations, which has led to a significant number of waiver approvals. We have also issued several varieties of BB waivers using the shielding concept based on critical and non-critical infrastructure. And next slide. So let's dive into the 6 recommendations proposed by Task Group 14. And recommendation number 1 was develop a checklist derivative of 107.31 and or 107.33 waiver applications to include specific checklist provisions. The first response is that the agency does have some concerns with the checklist. We are concerned that the checklist could oversimplify what we would consider a very complex process. And second, safety certainly comes first, and the FAA must consider many operational parameters that contribute to safety risk for each unique operation, and we evaluate each safety case to determine risk tolerance. The FAA provides extensive online guidance to help operators develop waiver requests and to offer the UAS Support Center for assistance as well. Additional mitigation guidance is proposed in the AAAC in the full FAA response report. Next slide. Recommendation number 2, create a streamlined and expedited Part 91-113 waiver process to ensure acceptable safety levels are met. The FAA's process for reviewing and approving Part 91-113 waivers requires a comprehensive review of the applicant's concept of operations, self-identified risks, and mitigations for those risks. 91-113 waivers consider collision risk to crewed aircraft first and foremost, and must ensure acceptable levels of safety for crewed aircraft that may be operating at low altitudes in the applicant's operational area. The Air Traffic Organization uses a similar process for all 91-113 waiver requests. Streamlining or expediting this process could introduce additional risks for crewed aircraft operations. Applicants need to be prepared to submit a clear safety case to the FAA when petitioning for relief from Part 91-113. The FAA has normalized the waiver process through the use of instructions for preparing a waiver, waiver safety explanation guidance, sample safety justifications for general guidance to the public, and specific 91-113 certificate of waiver authorizations or instructions. Next slide. Recommendation number 3. Clarify how to meet the Title 14 CFR 11 requirement that safety not be adversely impacted for exemption. The best way to assess if safety is adversely impacted is to consider each petition in context of the relief requested. As with waivers, each petition for exemption is unique, so it is difficult to provide general clarification on how to meet that requirement. Based on the 4 BB loss exemption petitions currently under review, we expect industry will be able to refer to those and other future grants of exemption to gain insight into how specific proposed mitigations lead to a determination that safety is not adversely impacted, and to determine how the FAA weighs specific safety measures as mitigations to specifically identify risks for each petition of relief. Next slide. Recommendation number 4, evaluate detect and avoid systems as a component of an overall safety case that incorporates strategic and tactical mitigations proposed by the proponent. All waiver and exemption analysis considers the whole of safety cases, both strategic and tactical mitigations. Detect and avoidance is just one tactical mitigation and may not be needed for all operations. All mitigations taken together are needed to determine whether a proposed waiver or exemption is sufficient to avoid collisions with other drones and crewed aircraft. We are evaluating comments from the exemption petitions for operational commonalities that could result in a set of common conditions and limitations for those exemptions. We expect those common C&Ls will streamline future waiver and exemption processing and encourage more requests. Next slide. Future applicants could look at C&Ls and request a similar exemption based on the specifics of their own system being able to meet the common C&Ls. We are focusing on what's required to make sure your system is good enough to operate safely, not how to do it. We expect our accelerated effort to process BB loss exemptions will lead to publishing summary grants in the near future. A range of variables contribute to adequate separation between drones and crewed aircraft in shared operational space. We are taking into consideration the ARC recommendations as well as public feedback from the exemption petitions that requested comments on DAA standards, declaration process, and evaluating third-party service providers. Recommendation number 5, identify NEPA environmental review streamlining measures to facilitate review of drone operations and use of the categorical exclusion or CATX process for permissions. FAA Order 1050.1F outlines FAA's policy and procedures for complying with NEPA. Refer to 1050.1F desk reference for guidance when conducting the environmental review of UAS projects. We are working on drone-specific guidance for environmental impact assessments to publish on FAA's website as well. All major federal actions are evaluated against the scope of existing CATX. Otherwise, we prepare an environmental assessment. We are also pursuing other strategic approaches for environmental review of proposed UAS commercial operations. For example, the FAA is currently preparing a programmatic EA for Part 135 package delivery operations in a particular state. When completed, the PEA can be used to support FAA approval of multiple operator requests in the state for package delivery operations. And next slide. Recommendation number 6, clarify acceptable targeted level of risk categorization and applicability. The FAA uses FAA Order 8040.64B, Unmanned Aircraft System Safety Risk Management Policy, to assess safety risks associated with applications for waiver, exemption, or authorization. This order uses quantitative and qualitative approaches, which include components of risk likelihood and severity to assess if risks are sufficiently mitigated or additional safety controls are required. The FAA considered implementing a target level of safety for drones, but determined it is inconsistent with our approach to safety performance metrics. The FAA developed a standard scenario using obstruction shielding earlier this year, and it has been shared with the public as well as our international partners. If approved, the 4 exemptions under review will have a monitoring plan and requirement in the conditions and limitation that will require reporting of safety performance metrics. Gathering metric data over time will provide a basis for the appropriate level of safety in future BB loss operations, whether by rule, waiver, or exemption. Next slide. So this concludes the agency's response. Is there any questions, or the floor is now open for questions?
Is there a expected timeline or a target timeline for an outcome of the 4 exemptions that are under review?
I think we should hear. I think there might be a possibility that they could be signed within, I would say, the next 30 days or so. They're close.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for the response. Very much appreciated. I had some intimate knowledge of this task group, I guess just listening to the response, I interpreted it as recommendations weren't accepted. I'm trying to find the right words. Weren't accepted. Perhaps I should stop trying to find the right words, but weren't accepted. And I'm wondering if the FAA has a view on how to expedite the adoption or moving the ball forward faster. Because the industry or committee members that were on the task group put forward recommendations from their experience, knowing all the things you referenced, and basically were saying they were too slow. Agencies said, well, we've got this and we don't believe in this and this is going to be too complex. Do you all have a recommendation on how we answer the task group, how we make it go faster? So what we're doing today is not fast.
Well, actually, David, I think we have expedited. I think over the last 6 months, I think that you have saw that. I think what we'll just announced at the symposium out in Dallas, where we're going with UTM. I think all of those things are going to enhance our ability to get the BB laws quicker. We look at what we're doing around the agricultural exemptions. I think in the last 6 months, you've seen a tremendous acceleration than what you maybe have seen in the past. So I don't think that the agency totally disregarded the recommendations of the committee. Actually, I think we heard you loud and clear. I think we are moving a lot quicker than we were. Maybe not as quick as you want us to, but I think we certainly are moving a lot quicker.
Yeah, I not to make too finer a point of it, we were tasked to provide suggestions. I think we did. And it would be just interesting to know formally what the agency's view on specifically what it will do to go beyond the things you just described, which are incredible, right? Which are much better than where we were. Stasis versus turtle, right? I'm trying to get to the hare. How do we, like, what recommendations or what offerings could the agency suggest that would make, like for the industry, maybe we should do things differently to make things go faster. It'd be interesting to hear a view on that at some point. Not today, I understand it's a question without notice, but it would be interesting to hear that.
No, I think that those things are all going to be contained within 108. I think those are all the things that we're trying to get to now, is trying to get to 108 so that we can make those things scalable and do those things at a much quicker pace. So all the things that I was mentioning earlier, all those things we're trying to work toward, which is informing 108 to get to the point where things are happening quickly. I don't know that we will ever perform at the pace that industry would like us to, but I certainly think that we will be performing at a pace that is sustainable and safe.
Okay, thank you.
A question from Kathy Cahill.
Hi there. First off, thank you for, of course, responding to the concerns we'd raised. I'm going to follow up on that because, in a couple of these things, it really basically says that waivers and exemptions are one-offs, and they're going to continue to be one-offs. There are some, exemptions where we're going to be able to look at some of that language and potentially be able to modify it, but it's still going to be a one-by-one. And there's got to be some way to accelerate this, because as more and more requests are coming in, I know the FAA personnel are being overwhelmed. And if we still have to do each one of these as a one-off, and it's going to really congest the system. And so it's something where I think a bunch of us who are operating get frustrated because we've done something, we've proven it to be safe in one area, but the moment we move it somewhere else, we have to basically start from zero. And I think there's a lot of frustration in the community that we feel like we've been able to do this in certain places, but now as we move it, we're recreating the wheel again and again, and it goes through this same review. If there's some way we can set up a streamline where if you've done something similar and you can prove the safety of that one, hopefully we could accelerate something that could be really helpful in terms of trying to move everybody forward more quickly. And also a lot of the exemptions and waivers we're asking for with the safety case, we're making up the safety case each time on a case by case because you aren't recommending any particular technology. And I did see a nice thing here about, well, you kind of need to make sure you've got one DAA, one command and control link, fallback, all these other things. That's helpful if it's published and out there, but it is still a case of we are having to be creative each time in terms of, okay, in our environment, what's working? Well, it's the same as this other environment, but we still have to go through the whole process as if we were recreating the wheel.
So thank you very much for that. And as I was speaking of earlier in the response about the 4 exemptions, that is exactly what the 4 exemptions were about. The agency clearly recognized that. And I say 4, actually it was 5 exemptions. Those 5 exemptions we feel pretty much covers, we would say 80 to 90% of what most of the applicants want to do out there today. The intent is, as we work toward trying to gather information and data to inform what we hope will be 108, is that you will be able to get a summary grant, and we will be able to do some cut and paste, which will extremely expedite that process for the waiver and exemptions.
Hey, Jeffrey, if I could add along those thoughts, I think this kind of goes back to where David was going, and that is, I think for the advisory group itself, the recommendations you just said, right? They're recommendations to us based on the tasking of, hey, what are you seeing from the industry that we believe could help? We're tasked not to go back and review the BB-LOS ARC. That was already done. It's really just bringing an industry perspective, and a lot of subject matter experts came together to say, hey, here's some things we see. And certainly understand there's a lot of good work that's going on. You guys are running, I think and maybe it's just a matter of how it's being framed up, because I think there's a lot of good things that are taking place, is what I hear. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for the FAA to consider how could some of those things that you guys are doing were framed up so industry could have some visibility on what are those things they could incorporate. Now, I'll take, for example, the 4 exemptions, for example, instead of having industry go out and look at them and evaluate them and come up to 50 different conclusions, why not summarize what those commonalities are, not committing to them, but just saying, hey, here's some best practices that would be helpful to the industry to help accelerate things. So I think that's what I saw from the recommendations were, what are those opportunities that the FAA can, the very things you're talking about, Jeff, which are really good, to help industry not guess. And so there's a lot, I think, that could be helpful from the industry perspective based on these recommendations if you guys could help collate some of those thoughts in a way, in a frame that's not overly committal, right? But certainly gives a little bit more direction. And I think that was also the intent of the checklist, wasn't so much to be overly prescriptive, because we know it's very complex, but it really was more of a direction of, hey, some more guidance so that folks can, help accelerate going down a common path. So David, I'm not sure if that was on or not, but that's kind of what I was hearing as an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the things you said about moving faster in the last 6 months, that's an absolute. I don't think any of us would debate that the last 6 months isn't better than the previous 6 months. It's exactly what you said. Is there any way you can package the things you're talking about so the whole can use them as instructive or educative or as a requirement that then allows everybody to package stuff in a manner that makes it more efficient for you as well?
Understood.
And I think that is well summarized.
I think, tossing on that, I think one of the things that,
Like a name of exactly.
faster than what? Yes, we are most certainly the fastest that the FAA has ever processed this in the last 6 months. But I am personally the fastest marathon runner I've ever been. And I'm not going to hang with Katie in a marathon because I can't run to the parking lot. So comparing, just saying faster is slightly a crock. I'd like us to quantify, if we're gonna fly to Washington DC and talk about what are the gaps and seams, I'd like to have us have hard conversations that have hard answers. One of the things that we saw in this is we talked amongst some of us have looked at these responses to the recommendations. I will state that they come across as unresponsive in many cases. That they're actually not a response so much as we want it to be faster. Well, it is. Doesn't get the job done. I think we as industry need to do a good job of saying what's fast enough look like. So there really is a standard that's reasonable. And some of the things we talk about safety. Recommendation 3 is one of my things I'd like to bring forward as how are you going to demonstrate that you can do this with no impact to safety? The only way to do that is to never fly anything. If anything leaves the ground, it impacts safety. So the question on recommendation 3 is how do we clarify what's an acceptable ask so that we can have a yes and get to approval. So some of those things come across as just being unresponsive in the request for a response. So I'll just say, if we're supposed to be a mirror of the industry back, here's what it looks like from our side. It comes across very clear, loud and clear that we pretty much think we've already got it figured out, and you're just going to have to wait for them. We'd like to work with you as partners. We're grateful to have a voice, but we'd like to use that voice to get things done.
No, and I don't, if I could respond to that, I don't think the agency is in any way saying that we have things figured out and you have to wait for the rule. I think I've stood here today and actually said that, we hear you loud and clear, and we actually are, trying to accelerate the things and the things that are outlined that we are doing to accelerate that. I think we are in no way, shape, or form saying that we have it figured out and that we have to wait for the rule. As we were talking about all of the things that we're doing that are going to inform the rule, so that when you get a rule, that we will get a rule with prescribed timelines and that things will happen at a sustainable rate.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. A question for you about your last comment about 108. One of the questions is how do we process waivers and authorizations better so they're more effective? 108 is by rule, where you don't need a waiver and authorization. So whenever that rule doesn't uniformly cover everything we need to do the operations we need to do, we still need to validate how are we going to do that waiver authorization process outside of 108. We don't believe 108, none of us, FAA included, believe 108 is going to be a ubiquitous silver bullet to everything UAS or AAM. But we do think it's going to be an advancement, and that's wonderful. I don't think there's any way it's going to be everything. So I'd like us to go back to what are we doing with waivers and authorizations, and are they meaningful ways forward for those things that require a waiver? By definition, the rule's not going to cover the waiver process.
No, and I don't, I think even with our current rules and FARs, we understand that waivers do not cover everything. I think that when you get to a publication of a rule, and we have had enough use cases to inform a rule, that we will be a lot more informed about what's happening. We'll have a lot more information about what's happening out there. So as we look at an operation today, that's the first time we're seeing that operation. By the time we get to a publication of a rule, we will probably have seen that operation several times. So I would like to think that we would be able to demonstrate moving or processing the exemption a lot quicker because we would have some experience with that operation.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Brad?
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation, Jeffrey. That's great. You obviously put a lot of thought in this response. I agree with Bob. I think that getting together with the team as a separate meeting would be a really good idea and bring their own use cases in to be able to determine what it would take to get us, beyond this waiver process. But on that note, if we're going to be dealing with the waiver process for a time, is your team able to tell us, what are the things in order of priority that we may be able to handle? So, for example, I'm looking at, risk categorization. And so is that the number one thing that's stopping people with waivers right now? Or can you go down the list and is it possible again to do Bob's meeting that he's recommended to sit down and go through this. I know it's gotta be the whole thing for a rule, it's still an exemption. But nonetheless, I think if people knew kind of what the order was that they needed to meet and spend the most time on.
Now, I hear what you're saying, but I think that's difficult to give a quantitative type answer to that because, as we said, each waiver and each exemption is going to be different. So, if my particular waiver, safety risk might be the most important thing. Based on, someone else's waiver, something else might be the most important thing. So I think it would be difficult to just say, by and large, if you're going to do a waiver or exemption, here's the number one thing, that you need to be concerned about. Because I think each one of those is going to present different challenges. So, no opposition to sitting down and talking to see that we find some common ground. But I think, again, to develop a checklist and say 1 through 10, here's are the things that you should be concerned about when processing waiver. I think that might be somewhat difficult.
Thanks. Christian Ramsey with Avionics, and we're one of the subjects of the exemptions, right? We currently hold 2 Part 107 waivers, and we're one of the 4 exemptions that you mentioned. And that's not our business of being an operator. We operate in order to test our equipment because we sell our equipment to manufacturers and others that are seeking exemptions and waivers. And what that has done accidentally has put us at the center of a lot of waivers and exemptions, whether ourselves or for our customers. And what we've learned over time is our own best practices. And I like using that terminology better than a checklist because a checklist might be too prescriptive, but we've got our own best practices. And what we've learned is certain vernacular and terminology and specifications of performance of a system are all helpful in, every waiver application results in requests for more information. And what do you mean by this? What's the performance of that? What's the performance of this? And we've learned over time after doing it a dozen times now, well, if I answer these questions up front, I'm only going to get 2 turns on R5 responses and questions. And so if we can, rather than it being 10, because everyone else is trying to figure this out in parallel, right? And so I do think a best practices guide, understanding everything's unique, right? But a best practices guide, more than just analyze everyone individually and analyzing the waivers and exemptions that have been approved, could be really powerful in just helping industry help FAA get through the process, because you're starting from a step that is 3 steps beyond where you would have started, just because you've got a more complete package that the FAA knows how to put.
I think we have Kenji on the screen.
Okay, looks like Kenji, go ahead.
Jeffrey, good to see you and good to see everybody out there. I was actually really excited about this presentation. One of the key elements that I saw that I really liked was the entire standard scenario, especially when you mentioned shielded operations, which really brings me to the question, are all the waivers and exemptions all that really different? Because there's going to be elements of commonality between most of them. And if there are elements there, you can create that standard scenario, which the Europeans are already doing. And since you're already doing it for shielded operations, that might be a pathway to sort of create that common cookbook, so to speak, to be able to enable these advanced operations. There's another thing I wanted to talk about real quick, is that I wanted to give a shout out to the exemption and waivers teams. I know they're different, but the biggest issue I see there are the exemptions team is really under-resourced. They're a small team that have to deal with hundreds of exemptions, and looking at the timeline of it taking years for some exemptions, if there's a possibility to resource them correctly, hopefully they can analyze the exemptions on a more timely basis and help the industry move forward by awarding these and analyzing these quicker on a quicker basis. And then a third thing is, one thing that wasn't mentioned in that your presentation was the extended visual line of sight. In essence, allowing beyond visual line of sight where the drone is outside the visual line of sight of the person, but you have airspace awareness. And that was an element that was in the report, but I didn't hear that addressed. And then finally, I was wondering why the FAA thought that the target level of safety metric was inconsistent with the approach to safety performance metrics?
So
Thank you.
currently, we have a target level of safety for our GA aircraft. So what we are intending to do is once the 4 exemptions are published, or even once, and using the data collected from that, and even with 108, to use that data to inform us to be able to come up with a target level of safety for drones. That's the intent.
Is that different than it's been, Jeffrey?
No, we just never had a target level of safety for drones. There's one published for GA, but there has not been one. There was a lot of discussions around that. And based on the data that we have, we don't think that we can come up with an accurate target level of safety for drones. So we want to use that data and information to inform it so that we come up with a much more accurate. We're not against it. We're planning to do it, but that's the plan and that's the process of how to get there.
When the 333 process was going on, we were discussing, you've got to get a drone to 10 to the -6 or 10 to the -8 safety level, but nobody could really explain what that meant. And so we, as an industry and FAA, went back and forth through countless machinations to try to codify that. I think the target level of safety concept is very critical, and also slightly rebranding the same thing of what are we really going to do and not just consider what we're going to consider what we're going to consider. This is what we got to figure out.
So,
how do we land this plane? How does industry help you do a better job?
and so I guess to get in a little bit more granular terms, the discussion was around when we look at the target level of safety for GA aircraft. And don't quote me if I don't get this number exactly right, but I think for this calendar year or fiscal year, we are expected to be something like 275 GA aircraft accidents that will result in a fatality. So trying to define a target level of safety of drones, we would have to come up with something very similar to that. And we don't think that we have enough data now to be able to do that. So that's why we want to get a little bit more informed information before we go to saying what an applicable target level of safety for drones are.
Okay, Kathy?
So I'll pull on that thread a little bit. So for those of us who are doing larger aircraft, which aren't really going to be covered by the Part 108, this target of level of safety is really, really important because we are doing aircraft. For example, we just working with Merlin did Cessna Grand Caravan. So, it's a function of knowing what that is and for us really making sure that we are in that safety calculation, examining the fact that we are doing things in a more safe manner than you would be doing it otherwise. So, by taking a pilot out of an aircraft that's monitoring the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in all conditions, 365 days a year, there should be some credit given for the increase in safety by the fact that you are actually removing someone from harm. And I think we really need to incorporate that in what we're doing. And, the larger drones, really aren't being considered here. A lot of the exemptions are being done in areas where you have really good communication. So I think we need to be cognizant of there are a lot of other things here that are going to need to move, especially as we're going into AAM. And the focus on Part 108, is great for these smaller drones and all these different components. If we try to do extended visual line of sight with a large drone, we're basically flying chase plane, which is not improving safety because now we've got the pilots in the chase plane, so we haven't improved that safety. So I think it's really kind of important that we're cognizant that this is moving things forward, but that the overall move towards the larger, et cetera, really aren't being addressed by this. And I want to make sure that we are focusing on where we need to go in terms of next steps. Because, doing that medical supply delivery, we want to be able to go longer distances. We want to use potentially bigger aircraft. It really becomes an issue of we're going to be forever in waiver and exemption unless we're thinking about what the next steps are.
To address both of those, as I said, I don't think the agency is opposed to having separate categories, or whether it's a drone below 110 pounds, or whether we're looking at unmanned aircraft systems. Simply, I think we need to make sure that we have good data going in to come up with a good metric. So I think the data we have is going to determine what the metric is. And, as far as the waivers and the exemptions, as always, we are more than willing and remain open to listen to any feedback as to how we can get better. We're certainly committed to sitting down until we get to the point where we're doing summary grants, or we get to the point where we're doing 108. If you have suggestions of how we can improve, we're more than willing to listen.
Thank you.
I love the discussion on target level of safety. And I think the target level of safety should be applicable, like it is in the traditional world, applicable to the concept of operations that you're applying. Right? So if you're doing a field or you're doing infrastructure, the water, your target level of safety is commensurate to whatever the requirement is there. Similarly, in my case, if you have a particular technology suite on your drone and you want to fly over populated densities, your targeted level of safety needs to be higher. We are big supporters, the company I represent, are big supporters of that. I guess I get, if you take commercial aerospace and GA as the poles, there are sort of reasonably set benchmarks of what those targeted level of safeties are, based on safety critical nature of those particular comms. There's long-standing traditional practices on how to assess target level of safety based on an applicant's safety case, and the safety case is then gets purged, for want of a better word, through the traditional means, right? Is it traceable? Is it the probability stack up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a really good way to approach this. If you take GA and commercial as the poles, I get a little bit concerned about when we talk about collecting data, because it almost gives me the impression that we're all going to have to fly to set the benchmark. And I think we should use the traditional means of creating and assessing a safety case, and where that safety case falls, based on the poles I discussed earlier, and then make a determination accordingly. If the drone fits a traditional aerospace standard, which talks about DOs and software levels and that sort of stuff. And so I guess I'd like to hear us talk about target level of safety as long as we assess and use a safety case and assess that safety case in traditional means. If we're just going to tout around safety as a title, that's not going to work. We've got to adopt what's there today as the way to go assess that, the way to create it, not just fly hours. Or we'll be doing this forever.
Now, forgive me if I oversimplified that, but I think, our current target level of safety that, like you said, for GA and commercial aircraft are extremely complex. I don't expect us not to put any more effort or complexity into determine the target level of safety for unmanned aircraft.
We are smaller operators in the rural area of America. Just wondering, FAA, do you have any kind of a rough ideas that how long to get this kind of a level of the data that can inform the target level of safety? So we're talking about 6 months, we're talking about a year, we're talking about 2 years, what?
We have no defined time frame at this time.
All right, we are going to have the opportunity, particularly during the opportunity to bring some thought leadership forward towards the end. So if there's some thoughts along this line, potential taskings in the future that we want to think about with FAA. I think some of the feedback here, could lead to some of those. So certainly, Jeffrey, appreciate the recap. I think for the task group, David, thank you for the leadership. Obviously, a lot of work by the industry to bring forward recommendations, which really wasn't intended from a level of criticism perspective, it's really just an opportunity where this industry see an opportunity to help accelerate some of those, what the industry saw as low-hanging fruit opportunities. So, and we think that, Kate and I were just talking, I think the things that you guys are doing are certainly in line with that. And certainly there could be some additional opportunities, maybe reframe some things that really show the industry how we can continue to accelerate as we get closer to Part 108. And so thank you very much, Jeffrey. We'll go ahead and move on to the response to task group 15, which was the community engagement, lessons learned. And Rebecca Quinton is going to brief the FAA's responses to task group 15. Kanji led that group. Kanji, thank you for leadership, and we'll look forward to responses.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. I just have not had a pleasure of really working with you all before, so I thought before we begin and make sure everybody knows where is the Office of National Engagement and Regional Administration. So we are a group that is within APL, Policy International Affairs and Environment, and we are the organization where the 9 regional administrators report through headquarters. So we are very much, as our name says, regional administration, but definitely national engagement. And it's one of probably the newer aspects of our organization. When we were put into APL about 4 or 5 years ago now, national engagement was one of the things added to our portfolio in a much more forward-facing way. Many of you are familiar with the regional administrators and know that we have been doing outreach of all sorts and engagement of all sorts for very much throughout the regions existing, but this really just kind of put that forward and more forward into the organization. So I really appreciate the opportunity being here today to talk a little bit through the FAA feedback on the recommendations. So next slide, please. So the task group 15 was asked to make recommendations on lessons learned and best practices related to drone and advanced aviation community engagement methods and identify specific aviation operating sectors and their related community engagement methods. So what the task group did was great. They created a recipe for the operators to really build out those plans and identified ways where that can be tailored to their specific operations. Did a great job of identifying some key stakeholders and methods of communicating, and then provided some sample cases as we move forward. So next slide, please. So this one I'm going to go over pretty quickly. As I said, they did what they requested. So the report is really well laid out to go through each of these sections and provide some information. So I'll quickly go to the next slide where we focus on the recommendations. So reading through it, the focus, I ended up categorizing the recommendations into 4 areas, really about hosting the report, the availability and publishing of the report. Can we move to the next slide, please? Maybe there's just a delay. We'll get there. And updating best practices. And then at the end, really focused on conducting outreach. And I put that together. There are multiple single recommendations on reaching out to different stakeholders on about a 6-month periodic basis. And I kind of just grouped that all together into one area of really focusing on just conduct outreach as we go forward. So the next slide, please. One more. Thank you. All right, so the recommendations, before I get started, I'm going to begin with a few overarching responses before I talk about it. One of the things, again, maybe some of you are familiar with, that FAA has really refocused our engagement efforts. Again, in that last 4 to 5 year period, a lot of it was in response to some of the feedback we were getting after we put in some new procedures. But really what that had allowed us to do is create a framework to really think through how we need to be engaging. One of the things we're very focused on now, and I think this also touches on it, is proactive engagement. The ability to build trust, the ability to create understanding early in the process before somebody says, oh, wait, what happened? And that opportunity to really talk to them about what is happening, and not necessarily to the extent that I can't think of a better analogy than the sausage being made and every ingredient, but an understanding of that we're making the sausage, right? And the sausage is going to have an impact as we move forward, and just that high level information as we move forward. I think the task group did a great job of really recognizing that and the lessons learned and the best practices in relating how to get forward. We really appreciate the fact that that there was an understanding that the operators themselves has a very large role. Again, one of the things we've learned is messaging, where the messaging comes from is very important. So while if the message, we can say the same thing as a pilot or you as an operator says, but it's going to mean something different if it's about operating because it's coming from the operator, not what the FAA says an operator does, right? While we have roles and responsibilities on what is most appropriate to be messaged from the FAA, there's a lot of things that make sense to be operated and messaged from the operators. And I think that recognition into the recommendations of the task force was really great to see. And sorry, I'm just making sure I touched everything I wanted to say here. And I think the only thing I wanted to point out is just a minor modification to simply cite operators as a lot of this was focused on commercial operators, but we know there'll be lots of operators. And again, the role of that operator is probably the same regardless of who is operating that. So some more specific recommendations. Next slide, please. So when it comes to hosting the report and availability and publishing, we do support the distribution of the task group's report, and we're really starting to consider ways on doing this. We think probably one of the most appropriate ways is to put it on our community engagement website. Again, a continued work in progress for us to really get out some of the FAA's messaging on and a place for us to be able to provide information about what's going on. Many of our regional offices also have their own community engagement website. So if you come to the the FAA page in different ways, you can get an understanding of what's happening near where you are or in general and what the FAA is doing. We will work with our Office of Communications to understand how to utilize social media as we put out those thoughts and recommendations as we move forward. And the other recommendations we have were to, next page slide, please, is to focus on updating the best practices and conduct the outreach. So we'll continue our outreach with the stakeholders. We'll consider the suggestion of the task group regarding that individual outreach. I think that maybe there's a way to bring some of those groups together. Maybe there's different ways for us to continue to do that outreach. So we will definitely thinking through the best way to do that, but we agree we have to continue to reach out to the stakeholders and that there might be slightly different needs depending on who those stakeholders are. And one of the things we want to explore more is a way to collect more iterations of this document as best practices continue to evolve and we continue to gain more understanding as a group of what is very effective in communicating and outreach and what may not be as effective as we were hoping or thought it might be. So we'll continue to explore ways to ensure that feedback loop is taken care of and that we can continue to have this document as a living document as we learn as an industry and what's best moving forward.
Before we turn to questions, what I thought it might be helpful for the group to hear, so Becky alluded to some painful experiences that we went through in implementing next-gen procedures that we believed would lead to great efficiencies in the airspace and didn't fully consider the community impacts and found ourselves behind the 8 ball. I think it'd be really helpful, Becky, for you to talk about how we identified new approaches that we thought would be effective, and then also how we assess the effectiveness of our outreach to drive continuous improvement.
Great, thank you. So definitely, as Katie said, we have this understanding that we had opportunities to improve our outreach. And a lot of that was we were behind the 8 ball when we started, that we underestimated the response to the public. And this is why I said proactive is very important. And for us, proactive has taken many different forms. We've, for us, a lot of the concern before was noise, right? So we created a noise chatbot. that we have on the website, because our website is not always the most friendly website to try to navigate. So what it does is it just provides an opportunity, instead of somebody going into our website and hunting around and trying to find that information, they can ask the chatbot a question and it'll pull up that website and provide them that information. It has a loop so that anybody's ever worked with a chatbot that continues to be a chatbot and keeps going around, if you can't get your question answered, ours will send somebody to what we call our noise complaint response and inquiry system, that then they can put in an email to talk about their questions, so that we can get a person into that loop, so that we're able to really have an opportunity to do that. One of our really effective things, and this is why I said it's really great to know that there's an understanding that the operators play a role, is we do a lot more workshops than we used to. And it's not just FAA. We bring in all the stakeholders when we have these workshops. And a lot of these workshops are not necessarily always even around a specific action that the agency is taking. It might be a place where we've had a lot of maybe confusion over what's going on, or we've maybe had a few projects and there's a disconnect on an understanding of how these things are moving together. And so we've been able to be really successful in bringing that together. As I said, the FAA can say, well, the pilot doesn't like, or there's a concern from a pilot if they turn that sharply. It's a lot more meaningful to come from a pilot and say, we don't want to do that turn. So that's why we find it very beneficial and helpful to have those different voices in the room, virtual room as it may be. But that virtual room has been really beneficial for us, because it allows us to post that online for those that may not be able to join in the first place. It allows us to take clips out of it and highlight it in different areas. We did one this year in Boston where we got to explain what was happening in the airspace in Boston. And then we went on and had a question and answer. And that has provided us with information now that we can point people to when they don't understand, why is there noise over my house? And now we have one to explain, well, because runways are laid out a certain way, and those runways laid out a certain way means flight paths happen in a certain way. And really just education for us is the key on all of this. And so it's really about education, ensuring people understand what's going on. For us, measurement comes from how many, the feedback we get. We love it in Boston. We had one of the members of their noise board come back to us, or their noise community group come back to us and say, you know, this was the first time in many, many years we were able to sit down and have a conversation, be able to really explain what's going on. For us, that's really beneficial to hear that there's a benefit. People are starting to understand what we're talking about. People are starting to understand why aviation has to happen in certain ways in certain areas, why airspace may be too complex to do things from an airspace commercial procedure point of view. So for us, that's been the benefit of going this route and having these opportunities in these different channels. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say the RAs play a large role in that. The RAs is really our local connection to, they participate in airport roundtables. Maybe some of you have already ran into them in different events that's going on, really connecting with the stakeholders and having those conversations and bringing that information back to us in the headquarters also.
All right, any questions for Rebecca? Wow, that's pretty good.
Giving the new person a pass. Sorry about that, Jeffrey.
So, I mean, obviously, a lot of good work, and we I think we all acknowledge that, you know, public acceptance is one of the keys to moving the industry forward. And so we thank the FAA for taking these recommendations and the opportunity to publish the report for other groups to take a look at and look at some of those best practices. And I'll put this out to everyone. I ran across this AAM community integration consideration playbook that NASA came out with. If you hadn't seen that, it's very, very complimentary. And so certainly I'm sure you guys have that as well, but there's going to be a lot of different groups trying to do the same thing, you know, to really ensure that AAM and drones will have a safe space to operate. And so I'll flip that out to the committee so you have it. I think it's going to be very complimentary to the recommendations that we made with the FAA post. So it's really nice to see those harmonization efforts going on, and certainly a way to impact the community. So, Kaji, just want to say, oh, I see you ahead. Sorry about that. Hey, Alenka, by all means, please chime in.
All right. Yes. Hi, everyone. Nice to see everybody. And Houston, I just wanted to tag on to that. In addition to the publication that NASA just released, which my organization, CAMI, spearheaded, we also are just in final drafts of planning for advanced air mobility guidebook that will be published by the American Planning Association, as well as a primer and toolbook for communities and airports on community engagement that will be published by ACRP. So I just want to underscore that it's really great to see this growing body of resources that involve the community engagement and community planning side of advanced air mobility. Thank you.
All right. Kenji?
Yeah, so thanks to the entire team for all the hard work that went into the report. It was, I was very pleased at how it turned out. And one thing that I want to mention is what just Yolanka said, and you as well, Houston, in terms of these new documents that are being generated. Definitely ask the FAA to include that in when it as part of the report, or the document when you upload it to the website. Make sure those are available or linked, so we have all these resources and they're all in one place, so people don't have to go around looking for all these wonderful documents and sort of best practices, and just have it in one location wherever it comes from. Just make sure it keeps on getting updated. And it looks like you have an excellent plan to do that. So thanks so much for doing all of that and taking our recommendations to heart. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? All right. I think, Gary, we're at that point of break, so I'll turn over to you. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
All right, that puts us about halfway through our meeting. We'll take about a 20-minute break. I have about 2:15 right now, so we'll come back at 2:35. Okay, all right, we're on break right now. Thank you. They're going to present information brief on waivers and exemptions. And we'll have a good discussion, opportunity for discussion after that. So Joe, you are on.
All right. Hello, I don't know if Bonnie is, I'm not seeing her on the screen, but if, are you able to come off of mute if I'm gonna call on you for anything, Bonnie?
Yep, I'm off of mute. Classic Zoom question. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Hear you
Perfect,
great.
awesome.
And we see you. You take over the screen when you talk.
Sorry about
so.
that.
That's great. So we're slated for half an hour here. Bonnie and I did a whole prep on how we were going to tackle this, tag team it, because I'm representing ABS and Bonnie represents air traffic, so ATO. And what we wanted to do was just give you a brief overview in the first 15 minutes of waivers and exemptions. And I hear that there was some good discussion earlier on. So we're always open for good spirited talk on that. But we want to kind of give you a delve into the relationship between what air traffic does, what ABS does, and some of the behind the scenes on waivers and exemptions. So with that, Bonnie, did you want to do anything before we get started? Or
Oh, you can kick it off and I'll just follow up at the end.
Okay, cool. So first off, waivers and exemptions essentially accomplish the same thing. You take a rule, and if you cannot comply with that rule, the rule essentially is taken away and it's built back up with either special provisions in a waiver or conditions and limitations in an exemption. So unlike a permit, I want to go get a construction permit or something like that, you're dealing with complex operational things in most cases. So the difference between a waiver and an exemption is the waiver is actually part of the rule that it came from. So part 107 has 107.205, the list of rules that's subject to waiver. Part 91 has 91.905, which is the list of rules subject to waiver. And that's where we get air shows from. That's where we do all the other things that weren't fully contemplated in the rule, but they were considered enough that you have the rest of that rule kind of as a warm, fuzzy blanket around it. Exemptions, on the other hand, exemptions are actually a beautiful thing in government, where you can petition the government for something that was not contemplated by rule yet. The relief you seek is not in a rule. So that's why they're held to a rulemaking standard. They fall in part 11, which is rulemaking. And with an exemption, same thing happens. The rule that you identified, you have to provide at least equal level or no adverse safety effect. And in the drone world, no adverse safety effect is the better case to make, because equal is hard to prove, and public interest. So with that, how do we ingest that information? And I think this is a hot point here. We hear from industry a lot, like, tell us exactly what you need and we'll provide it. And this is where kind of transparency of government comes in again too. For waivers, we use a standard form that's called 7711-2 for you to fill out, and we issue a 7711-1. Now, why does it sound so bureaucratic? Because you definitely don't want a government that says, or changes their mind, or says, hey, give me this stuff. This is what we think we need. And then we change it again and say, give me this stuff. So what happens is, if you're going to create a new form, it has to go through the Paperwork Reduction Act. And that's not about saving paper. That's about burden on the public. So we should not be just saying, because we think we need to know these things, fill out this 80-page form. So we go back to our original forms we have, a 7711. For exemptions, there is no such form. All there is the rule that says you must supply this information. Now, with that, I think we have some flexibilities in there that we can talk about in the questions here. Short of making a form, I think there are some ways that we can do things like waiver safety explanation guidelines. We can do sample exemptions, Federal Register notices, things like that that are actually happening now. And I will want to mention part 137, but let me get to the ATO and ABS agreement. So whether it's a waiver or whether it's an exemption, what we came to years ago was an agreement that for drones, because the level of safety and because the level of actual engagement from the FAA is different, air traffic, for example, is not providing, even though they could, even though so there's some places they have radar coverage, but for the most part, they're not providing air traffic services below 400 feet outside of controlled airspace. So therefore, to ask air traffic to make a safety determination for things like beyond visual line of sight waivers or exemptions for agriculture below 400 feet outside of controlled airspace, it's an unfair question to ask them. So we did an agreement that said below 400 feet outside of controlled airspace, AVS would be the leader in the risk assessment, but we'd work with air traffic. Above 400 feet or in controlled airspace, ATO would lead that. The nuance is when we start to replace even things above 400 feet, you start to replace eyeballs or visual observers with technology. Air traffic said they'll come back to us in flight standards, flight technologies and procedures, General Aviation and Commercial Division, and we will do the safety assessment for the replacement of eyeballs with technology. So that's worked out good. We put that agreement in the FAA Order 8040.6, and that's how we work it behind the scenes. If you ask for something and you're saying air traffic is holding up my waiver for this, it's probably more complicated than that. It's probably that they're working with us on the technology side, and we're working our internal processes to make that work. So Bonnie, I'll stop at that before I go into 137 example or further on the Federal Register. But if you wanted to explain maybe kind of how you use waivers for airspace access,
Sure.
and kind of what you consider down to the local level.
Sure, absolutely. So Joe kind of explained the agreement between ATO and AVS, but just kind of getting a little bit more into the weeds on what the 91-113, the team that I work on as part of AJVP 22, which is policy, on what we do. So you send your waiver request in, and the first thing we do is we want to gather all the information. I think it was the gentleman from Aero Environment earlier that talked about, you know, how important it is to provide a complete package, because we want to make sure that your code gets processed efficiently and safely. So we want to be the go-between between the different lines of businesses within the FAA, whether it's Spectrum, ATO, AVS, safe, or I already said Spectrum, safety, to make sure that your code gets processed. So we want a complete package from you. Once we do that, we put all the information you have into a checklist to see if there's anything else we need. And then we run it through what's called an intake team, which is different members from different lines of businesses within the ATO, AVS. Again, it could be NATCA, airspace, to make sure that we have a complete package to send forward to the person that's actually going to analyze the COA. And once we do that, then we wait for, like Joe said, we wait for the determination. You know, if it's AVS that's determining maybe a DAA system that we haven't seen before, then we wait for his group to come back. Once we have the okay, yes, it's okay to issue the COA, we write the COA, and then it may go forward to an airspace authorization. So then we need to have the airspace people weigh in to say, you know, where is this operation going to take place? Is there other things we need to consider? Right off the bat in the intake team, when we first get your package, we're sending all that information to airspace so they can start to get an idea of what's coming to them. So that's what we do from the waiver standpoint. Joe, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I wanted to really focus on, we can make policy determinations in the AVS realm of things, but, and specifically, I know there's some in the room here too, that, you know, whether you operate at a test site or whether you operate under one of the programs like the Integration Pilot Program, particular areas, it goes right down to the local service center that is actually going to be dealing with that traffic. So that's kind of how we've evolved. And even the automation through Lance and everything, that started as a standard waiver process. So we are striving to get things more automated. And the one example I wanted to use before we open this up for more discussion is you're going to see a lot more things coming up now, because we're intentionally trying to do what we did with rulemaking back in 107, which was link up our exemption and waiver teams with the rulemaking team and lean forward on operations now so that we can build it into a better rule. And 137, the agricultural operations, many of you probably know this, but it's an indication of where we're going, and so is the Federal Register notice of the 4 exemptions we put out there with a 5th Federal Register notice announcing that. 137, for all the years since Section 333 days, they've required an exemption to get an agricultural operator certificate. And we certificated the first agricultural operator in 2014. Since that time until 2 months ago, we've been treating them as regular operators and certificating them through the Flight Standards District Field Offices, the FSDOs. And we had certificated 158 of them. But we saw that we had about another 800 to 1,000 exemptions and people waiting in line to get these. So we did an analysis and we looked at the overall risk of what a drone operation over a farm field actually presented and whether we should be spending that much time on it. And this gets to the technical level of safety and everything else too. So we put out a notice to our field, but it's public, it's 8900.659, that explained we're changing this process. We were gonna centralize this. We standardized the exemption so that we could give a summary grant to everybody that was in line. And in the last 2 months, we've actually certificated another 260 operators. And we've issued more exemptions than that. So that's what we're kind of striving towards, whether it's package delivery, whether it's infrastructure inspection. Where can we find the commonalities and not have to do this one-off every time and give you better information out there? So with that, I'll stop and open up for any questions. Sure.
I'm attending with Android Technology. So first of all, thank you for very informative brief. I have a couple of questions. So this waiver process, and we had a great discussion earlier on, and
was just talking to Houston, I do have some thoughts I want to share there, but coming back to specific, how you explained it, lately there's been a lot of discussion around the NTAP process, the near-term approval process, which can be used as means of mitigation when you're applying for waivers and stuff. So the process that you guys are outlining, how does that tie up with the NTAP process that's being run by other folks within FAA? Or is there a tie-in?
So really, the process you're talking about is a near-term approval process for third-party services or service suppliers. One of the open exemptions that's out there right now that we asked for comment on, Avionics, is an example of that. And the goal of what we're trying to do is, some people might call it modular, but if you're going to use the same set of ground-based technology or services, and we're asking you, what we do right now is you present that as part of your package as an operator, because we issue waivers or exemptions to the responsible person who's the operator. But if we can get to a place where we can just do approvals of that service, then the modular part of your waiver or exemption in the short term should be able to say, I'm using ABC drone service, and I don't need to give you the full justification that that's a viable solution. So yes, we are trying to get to there, and we're doing it by issuing approvals, potentially granting, because I can't say whether we're going to grant or deny potential exemptions, but when you see them, they're going to be slanted towards, can you break out that chunk of an associated element of a third-party service so that everybody does not have to repeat the process of explaining that third-party service.
So no, thank you for that. I'm going to rephrase it just to make sure I understood correctly. So if a champion operator was to come to you with a waiver application, and in there's an NTAP aspect for a third-party service that proves to you that it's providing sufficient mitigation for the risk that we are trying to eliminate here, and that waiver gets hypothetically granted. Technically, that NTAP accredited service, I'm not sure if accreditation is the right word, that service could potentially be used as is in a separate waiver application, and that gets fast-tracked.
Absolutely, that's the goal, but there is no existing mechanism right now for us to use the flight school example. You know, you can go start a flight school right now as a certified flight, as a CFI, and start giving flight instruction. You follow Part 61. If you want to get an FAA approved flight school and have reduced hours, instead of 40 hours, 35 hours for your private pilot certificate, if you want to use, potentially get examining authority, all these other things, we have a mechanism in Part 141 that allows you to get an operator certificate or be recognized as an FAA approved school. We have this in the same respect of certified equipment for aircraft, but do we have that yet for third-party services? No, but we're very interested in that because that's another topic that the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC brought up for us to consider in rulemaking. And if we want to hit the target with the right level of rulemaking, we want to see near-term approvals happen now so that we can reference that in our preamble of the rule. So I think we're both saying the same thing. We want to get to the same place you want to get to.
Thank you.
Yep.
Joe, I don't have a question, but I've got a comment.
Yes.
I could not be more, and we hear this a lot amongst the other members of the AAAC, thrilled with how flight standards has shifted gears in the last 18 months of making progress forward for what does it take to get to yes. Yes is not always appropriate, but there's a right way to get there. And I'd love to give a specific shout out. You have ridden with many of these. Joe Morat knows every IPP participant and beyond participant on the planet. And your leadership in flight standards, and Derek Hufty takes all the darts. He's the guy that says no. And we all go back to Derek and say, come on, man,
let's figure this out.
Well,
And
no, sometimes lead to ATS too, so the decisions are. what
ATS,
we're-
super fair.
Yep.
So just want to say thank you. That bold leadership is making an impact and it makes a big difference. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. And honestly, we want to hear some feedback here too, and good or bad, and that's, you're all pathfinders here. You're all trying to go through the brick wall first, which is,
Hey, Joe, Houston Mill. So thanks for excellent brief. Certainly appreciate that by you and Bonnie. So you really did a nice job of explaining the difference between the exemption process and the waiver process. And you've obviously learned a lot based on the hundreds or thousands that you've done. Have you all thought about, is there anything from a best practice perspective that you guys could frame up that you've learned that could benefit industry, and then on a sidebar, benefit you all from not having to go through the headache of, going through the same conversation over and over and over? Because it sounds like what you just explained to us, I was just thinking back here, how beneficial, picking your brain and knowing some of those best practices and have them at a place where folks can just go and learn. It wouldn't be overly committal per se, but informationally speaking, I think industry would find it of tremendous value.
yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think we've got leadership support from above, Mark and others here in the room, that we can do a better job of getting out some criteria, getting out some best practices of things that have happened, but we can also lean on industry to, feed you some information that you might want to come out with some observations that you might have some more freedom in publishing those than we do. So our goal is not to have to treat every single exemption as a one-off, as a unicorn. And people have probably heard me say this before, but when we broke the exemption system years ago, the FAA in 2013 had adjudicated a total of 432 exemptions, I think it was. We did the first UAS ones for Motion Picture Association of America. Astreas was the first. We did 6, then we did 7, then we did a dozen, then we did about 40, and we really started to see the buckets. And we went back behind the scenes, and what we did is we started to make summary grants based on those 40. And that was 2014. By the time we got to 2016, which was the small UAS rule, remember, we'd only done 432 over here. We had granted over 5,000 exemptions, and we had 19,000 in the queue. And all 19,000 of those people got a letter that said the relief you seek now should be in Part 107. And that dropped us down, and that left us with only a few dozen exemptions. And then the rest was trickling into waivers. So we're intentionally trying to do that now with the new rule. We're trying to do that same thing and be more transparent, like you said, on how we get to the summary grants. So.
I won't speak for Brian Wynn, President CEO of AUVSI, but that's a pretty good venue, I would think, for opportunity. Brian, I'm sure your team might consider if there was information that industry could benefit from. Generally speaking, there's so much effort going on with your organization, Brian, that could, and I'm sure there's others as well, but I love the thought. It could be very beneficial.
Any questions for Bonnie or me, or I see Kenji?
Oh, Kenji.
Joe, good to see you. Forgot my exemption. Just kidding. So the thing I'd like to ask you is if you could provide perspective to the AAAC and also the members of the public out here, how many people are actually on the core exemption team and then also the waiver team, and how many you process, just to show how you are resourced and how much could you benefit from more resources?
Well, it's hard because we work, it depends on the exemption. So if it's a straight infrastructure type exemption, if it's not package delivery related, that's mostly a team within AFS 800 that works those things. And I mean, between 2 branches over there right now, you're probably talking a dozen people or so. If you're talking Part 135, then you're talking another 6 or 8 people on that side. And this is just exemptions. It's not the waivers here. So you've got people
that a team writes these things. You're not just a single person. So that doesn't count the attorneys that get involved, the rulemaking analysts that get involved. AUS has specialists, and then we do risk assessments behind it. So I can tell you this. We did this for the IPP. We tried to determine how many people it would take to staff the IPP, and we realized that there would need to be precedent-setting exemptions. So part of what we came to the conclusion of was, what does it take to do a precedent-setting exemption? You've got notice and public comment, you have to adjudicate comments that come in, you have to coordinate it through legal, rulemaking, everything else. So we did our best to say, all right, does that mean it's 100 person hours to write that 40 to 70 page exemption? Everybody said, no, it takes much more than that. All right, is that 2,000 person hours, which is a full year's worth of one person's time? And we said, no, that's way out of whack. So the number we landed on was 800 hours. So if you divide that up by supervisors and managers and lawyers and everything else, that's essentially what it takes. But to pin it down to an exact number of how many people are actually writing it is hard, but it's in the dozens, it's not in the hundreds, if that helps.
So you're doing a lot with the very few people.
Yeah, and exemptions are typically, we get field input, but exemptions are typically a policy making activity. So it's done at headquarters.
How many exemptions are in the queue right now?
I would need Derek or somebody here to say it. Not as many as you'd think. There's the agricultural ones, let's set those aside. But besides that, I believe the number is less than 100.
Okay, so the ag's the big one, and that's the one where you're trying to streamline the process.
Yeah, the ag was up to, I think we had over 100 that were assigned to FSDOs, and then we had about 200 that were already granted but in the certification queue, and then we had another 800 that were still being processed as exemptions. So those are now summary grants. So when you do a summary grant, essentially you're just analyzing the situation and making sure that it's similar in all material respect. And if it's similar in all material respect, you get the same conditions and limitations. So you take that 800-hour activity and you drop it down to a few hours for somebody to read through ConOps and get it up through management signature and everything. So that's where the real efficiency comes in. The sooner that we can get to repeatable summary grants, the more efficient we can be.
Okay. That's super helpful.
Yep. Sorry I don't have exact numbers, but in full transparency, dozens, not hundreds.
Yeah, I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yep.
Hey, well done, Joe. Like, you've been at the forefront of making some progress, and I'm not just saying that because we spoke earlier today, but hey, one of the things that I'm interested in, sorting and standardizing this process is going to make the flywheel turn faster. And I think the faster we can get to the sorting and the standardizing, the faster that 800 hours becomes 400 hours, becomes 200 hours. And the resource you have becomes more rather than less. So it'd be great to sort of understand a timeline on that. It's not now, but at some point for this group, because I think then we can see the light and we know it's not a train. One of the things that I'm particularly interested is lots of these approvals, for want of a better word, come with conditions and limitations.
Yeah.
And often you can get what you ask for, but come with conditions and limitations that don't let you do what you need to do. And the process to work through the conditions and limitations is not clear. And so and I understand why, just for everyone and me included, do we have eyes on clarifying the process that underpins the framework? So for instance, you apply for an exemption, you get an exemption, it comes with expected or unexpected conditions and limitations. There's an intention to burn the conditions conditions and limitations off through performance or through some other means, is there a time frame or an intent or a recognition that that framework needs body and soul?
Yeah, and maybe I'll lean on Bonnie for a little of this too on the air traffic side to confirm with what I'm saying here. Tell me if I'm crazy, Bonnie, but for those that aren't in David's position where you're running a 135 operation, if you're an air carrier in the standard, sense of it, and you're operating with a King Air or anything else that's out there, you've got your rules you have to comply with, and you've got your op specs, your operation specifications. And that's pretty much what you're looking at. Your op specs are kind of your conditions and limitations. The complexity in how we've pieced this together prior to having a rule has resulted in somebody like David's group has to not only deal with the rules and the op specs, you've got to deal with conditions and limitations in what we have in 2 different exemptions now. One is related to the aircraft, one is related to the operations, and special provisions that are in the air traffic issued COA. So you've got to deconflict a whole bunch of different things. And we've been aware of this for a while. So we are looking at, in the current Federal Register notice and some of the upcoming things, where can we streamline that and lessen the amount of conditions and limitations that you're getting? And that's a balance with legal, because legal always has us really looking at it closely for legal justification that we made the rules go away and built them back up. So we're doing our best to reduce the number of documents or reduce the number of conditions and limitations. But we're also really looking at, especially in the case of air carrier, do we have other places besides the exemption where we can put requirements that are more flexible than going through the exemption process? And this is also a legal dance, but you'll see conditions and limitations that will say the operator must use a visual observer unless otherwise authorized by the administrator. That unless otherwise authorized gives us the flexibility to say you're using visual observers, but now in your op specs or in someplace else, we're going to have the ability to say you can replace that with a ground-based radar or onboard DAA system, that type of thing. So we are trying to, we recognize that mixed signals we're giving with lots of conditions and limitations, and we are trying to reduce that. The full reduction of that is a rule. So that's where we're headed. But Bonnie, without giving way too much away here and how we're going to try to look for efficiencies. Anything you want to add on the air traffic side? Or
No, I just think in addition to what you said, I feel like, at least from my perspective, these first 4 exemptions are kind of a learning process. And if there are specific conditions and limitations that you guys have questions with, that'd probably be something that we would want for feedback to take a look at those.
Yeah, I should say, mine was not, my comment was not a criticism, because I understand, whether we like it or not, I can actually understand why it's panning out the way it is. It's more, that last bit you said, at the discretion of the administrator.
Yeah.
There's no defined criteria. So therefore, without a defined criteria for how you satisfy the administrator, it becomes difficult for everyone, including your team, to actually pin the tail on the donkey anywhere. And so that to me needs to be fleshed out. And if it is, it makes it easier for everyone. And when I say everyone, I'm talking a big everyone, not just the applicant in this case. Because it is obscure, which works sometimes in our favour, but other times leaves a whole group of people behind us with no tangible way of making a decision. Let's put it that way.
So hopefully you'll see it. And I have to be a little bit cautious in how I say this. As Bonnie said, with the 4 Federal Register, the exemptions around that, and the questions in a larger respect that we asked in that Federal Register notice, we are trying to see if there's a way we can put it more plain language. If you cannot meet certain standards, but you can meet parts of those standards, this should be acceptable. And it's kind of the advisory circular type mentality of this. We're not going to tell you if you do this, you will get exactly that. We're going to tell you this is one means, but not the only means. And hopefully what you see come out of those, and they're under a lot of scrutiny right now, trying to make sure conditions and limitations match up between the four. Any kind of material that alludes to standards matches up and makes sense. So you're spot on that we need to do a better job with that. So we've been taking the feedback and trying to get there. I don't know that we'll get a win on the first time, but we're going to get closer to a win, hopefully.
Yeah,
So.
well done, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions for anyone? Any other questions for anyone? I can't see online, but can see hands up. I'm sorry about this brief, yeah. Oh, okay, I see, Kenji, one more there, Kenji.
One more from me. You know, I always have questions. And Joe, I've talked to you about this before, and I mentioned it to you when I think I saw you at the FAA symposium. The question I had is, well, not really a question, because I know you wouldn't be able to answer it, but as a comment, I'm hoping that one day insurance could be taken into, private insurance could be taken into account in that risk analysis, because you think about it every day on our roads, on our freeways, there's vehicles traveling, there's certain federal standards, of course, but all of them have insurance. And the big thing is, say, for example, if something falls off of the back of a truck, there's an accident whatsoever, it's an unsecured load. And you can collect if there's damage to your car or there's an injury or death or whatever. There's this private industry side that helps sort of takes into account liability, risk, and in essence, if something happens, there's a way for a victim to recover. So I'm hoping eventually the FAA, either by through the mandate through Congress or at the state level, that whole insurance piece really starts to play a larger role, because I think that it's a risk mitigation where there is we have very low tolerance for a lot of risk, but at the same time, if there could be credit for something like that, I think that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks. The only comment that I'll have on that, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong here, when you get to the level of air carrier, that is in your statement of intent, whether you have insurance or not. So at the highest levels, there is a DOT requirement for insurance. At lower levels, I will say this, having owned and operated flight schools, you would not be doing that without insurance, and that insurance is 10 times what it costs you to insure your aircraft privately for a reason. So I still do believe that even the regulations we put out here, the insurance industry, without our reinforcement, does drive a lot what is actually possible, even down to the lowest flight school level. So point well taken, and I encourage the whole act through this group here, giving us feedback, or especially through anytime we put something in the Federal Register or an NPRM, please get your opinions out there, because we actually read every single one of them. We do our best to answer them in there, and sometimes we change direction based on the feedback we get. I know there's some people that write voraciously in those things, Mark, and others, thank you very much. And we really do appreciate the comments and everything. So, and thank you for having me here, and Bonnie.
Joe and Bonnie, thank you. It was very informative. Thanks so much for all you all are doing to advance the industry, and we certainly look forward to continue to work with you to move things forward.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. Well done. Okay, with that. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeffrey Vincent to present some new taskings to AAAC. Jeff?
We'll just bring them up, and then we'll go to the podium. I don't mind going to the podium. You gonna bring up the slides? I'll just switch it over. Okay, so we actually have two new taskings, and tasking number 16 is the AAC to make recommendations of areas of opportunities for innovative infrastructure investments to support aviation new entrants and other transportation and land-based autonomous technologies. These recommendations will support the FAA's strategic planning and implementation of new entrants in an autonomous multimodal environment. So what we're really looking at is that are there opportunities for government and industry maybe to even partner together? But as we make investments into infrastructure to enable new entrants, what are your recommendations of things that we could do, things that we should do to plan for that, in the near future? As some of our cities out there now, they've got we have auto cars operating, we've got drones. There's all kinds of environments out there, mixed environments or whatever else. So what does it look like, or what do you think of how we should start to plan for infrastructure around those things?
Okay, any questions on this tasking, just from a clarity perspective? Yep.
Is it physical infrastructure or digital and physical infrastructure?
Both.
Thank you.
Both. Excellent. All right, well, Jeffrey, thank you for this recommendation, and the AAC will accept it. I have reached out to one of our members, knew this one was coming. We'll be looking for a co-chair, so I'll follow up. But we're really excited for the opportunity to provide the FAA feedback, so thank you.
Thank you. And tasking number 17. AAC to make recommendations on prioritizing the development of and harmonization around consensus standards from an industry perspective. These recommendations will support FAA's new interest in the certification process. So I know there's been a lot of conversation around getting to consensus standards, a lot of conversation around harmonization and those types of things. So this will be an opportunity for the industry to make recommendations to the agency as to how we prioritize and maybe speed that up.
Dave Jeffrey's obviously a quick learner, so very nice. He's already got it. All right, any questions for clarity on this particular tasking? Yes, yeah.
The definition of the word harmonize, we're talking US, not international harmonization.
Again, both.
Yes.
I mean, we know there's been a lot of conversation, and Jess, you certainly can weigh in here. There's been a lot of conversation on the AAM side about harmonization around the world with other ANSPs and what that looks like. So we're looking at both. Please, Jess, any comments?
I'll just add, from having sat on the NAC and other places there, we know that a mixed encryption environment is the most efficient environment that you can have. And when we move into autonomy, we're going to need to drive closer and closer to a very common standard there. So we know that there's been work in other organizations that have sort of looked at where industry seems to be heading, and having a better understanding of, maybe this is in a good place, but this is not so much in a good place. We take a look at Spectrum and other things working with FCC. We're going to have those conversations about what we need to protect. And so I think having that advice both from you to get a lay of the land, and then also what's the best way to move forward to get to that commonality.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Dave, for the question. All right, Jeffrey, Katie, thank you for these. Oh, one other question, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, Yolanda.
Yes, thank you. I actually had a question on tasking 16, on the infrastructure tasking. Is that request pertaining to AAM as well as UAS?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, with no other questions, Jeffrey, Katie, thank you for both these excellent taskings. AAC will certainly look forward to them. Can I get a motion to accept these taskings from someone? All right, thank you. Kevin, a second? All right, thanks, Bob. All right, if no objections, so move. We'll consider these taskings accepted, and I will be following up with the leadership and solicitation for everybody to join the committees as always. And thanks in advance for your amazing contributions from you and your teams. So with that, we are going to move on to new business and future agenda topics. And this is really an opportunity, for you to kind of bring forward. I know Katie and I talked a lot about, hey, we want your ideas and thoughts on opportunities, what's everything that's out there in front of us. What are some other things that we believe we could assist the FAA in thinking about, bringing recommendations forward that would be beneficial for the industry? So open dialogue, opportunity for anyone to bring up. We're going to collect those thoughts. I'll be getting those to Katie for future considerations, for future tasking. So nothing's off the table. We're just really an open thought leadership discussion. So with that, I'll open it up. All right, got a hand up? Hey, Roby, how are you, my friend?
Oh, Houston, thank you. I apologize, I was a little late to this. So I just wanted to follow up also on that recommendation 16. When I heard the basically the question about are essentially infrastructure can be physical as well as digital. Just wanted to get a little bit of amplification. Is that digital infrastructure also that potentially could include things like communications, navigation, and surveillance services across a broad, wireless infrastructure?
Yes.
Okay,
I
great.
think I would just add that I think the people the committee members who are working on this tasking, it could be so many things. So as you think about this task, where do you see the prioritized needs? So that as advice to coming back to FAA, we know how to process it and we know how you think of these things in terms of prioritization.
Okay, thank you.
Kenji.
So I had a question for the FAA. It might be something that you report out to like next meeting or something, but I had a question about the BVLOS NPRM. It was originally targeted for February and now it's been pushed out to August 2024. And I was just wondering what the reason was, because I understand it was an all hands on deck sort of situation. And I know the fellow ACT members would be interested in that. You don't need to answer it right now, but maybe for next time, just let us know what's going on with that.
Well, it's still on schedule for August. I think we announced early on that, a few months ago that it had slipped to August. And it was nothing more than just the amount of work, the amount of data and things that needed to be processed that pushed it along. At the present time, we're working diligently to stay with that August date. I think that you've heard for a long time that BVLOS is a high priority for the agency. That has not changed. It is a very high priority for the agency. And yes, there is all hands on deck. So anything is possible, but we're not expecting any further slippages beyond August.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And then along the same tack, in terms of the remote ID implementation, when the manufacturer mandate came down back then, the enforcement date was pushed back. Is there any news on what's been happening on the compliance date that's coming up very soon, next month, whether that's going to be sort of pushed a little bit back in terms of enforcement because of the shortage of parts for modules and such? Do you have any update on that as well?
So we are aware of all of the different issues that are surrounding the agency's implementation date of the 16th. We are certainly having discussions around those. And I think that we will have an update soon, and we'll get an update out to industry as soon as we can. But we're certainly aware of the issues, and we're working through those.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
One of the things I'd like to propose, firstly, thanks for putting this together today. It's really wonderful for the people that do the work in the background. One of the things I'd like to propose is we have a metrics viewpoint at the start of the meeting. How many waivers are in process? How many exceptions? What's the average time? What's the mean? What's the outliers? What's the fastest? And really start with the view of ultimately committing to a timeline, right? Like a timing, accepting that there's always outliers, but you can learn a lot from the outliers, right? I don't think anyone here romanticizes it's always the regulator's reason for it being late. We submit the stuff, you know, and you submit rubbish, it takes longer, right? But there's a lot to learn from a data-based, well, the data's going to percolate the truth to the top, right? It's not speculation. And we don't have that yet. We've talked about it a few times, and I'd like to propose that some folks go away and we pick some critical areas that are of interest to all of us. Exemption and waivers always come to mind, and put a clock on them, and without creating an industry in the background to try and maintain those metrics, which I'm sure we've all lived. You've worked in a big company, you know that industry exists. So I'd propose that. I understand why people may not want it, but I think it's important for us to work on facts and data rather than opinion. For all of us.
Kathy?
So I've got a couple of things that I think might be of some value. Right now, we know that there are a tremendous number of Part 107 operations that are occurring, but we actually aren't collecting the data on them. And, you know, it's a case where we have operators who are doing, you know, hundreds of thousands of operations, but they're not reporting to anybody what those operations are, and really building up that safety case of we've had this many operations with this few failures. Is there something we can do as a community to help get that data to really show everybody just how safe most of these operations are? So that's kind of one idea. And the other one is, and I know this involves the FCC, but how are we going to deal with spectrum? You know, at the moment, a lot of things have to do with 5G, but you have areas, especially in rural communities and in topography, where you are very limited in terms of your 5G communications. So what can we do to help protect some spectrum for larger drone, regional air mobility, or large unmanned aircraft cargo type operations in these areas? You know, so far it's been a challenge to work the spectrum issues, and with spectrum getting sold off, I kind of feel like there's some risk here to the community that if we don't move quickly, we might actually get blocked in the future.
That is a very, very good question, and I would say that the time is now. It's probably earlier than now, but now is the best we can do. We have ongoing conversations with NTIA, the FCC, the White House on spectrum issues across all aspects of transportation. And I do think if there is a particularized issue or interest for UAS and AAM, it would be good for this group to articulate what that is and, you know, what the data behind that is, so that we can make that case. We are obviously very focused right now on sale of additional spectrum that's really close to our radio altimeters, closer than the previous sale. But it'd be good to understand across FAA as a whole what you think the potential implications are, safety and otherwise, so that our leadership is able to make that case and ensure that at least our concerns are carefully considered.
Yeah, and I would just add, Kathy, thanks for bringing that up. And if you wouldn't mind, and this is for everyone, and you guys have done this in the past, and that is, you know, maybe frame up the thought in forms of potential tasking. And if you forward that to me, then we can kind of polish it up and everything else, and I can present it to the FAA, you know, from a perspective of thought. So these are all good thoughts. You know, David, what you provided was a potential agenda item that we could include, you know, in the future. So framing these up is exactly what we wanted. So really good thoughts. Let's keep them coming. But as you have them, if you could maybe think about framing it up in the form of a potential tasking, get those to me. I'll consolidate them, and I'll make sure that Jeffrey and Katie get them. Yes, Bob?
Just a couple of quick thoughts. One, we spent most of our time on UAS today. As we talk about addressing AAM issues and progressing into the graduate level of unmanned vehicles, do we have the right people in the room? I'd like to suggest that we have have some brand new entrants to the field that are now certified. Wouldn't be a bad thing to have any one of those companies that have a certified AAM aircraft sitting in the room to talk about their lessons learned and their what's right look like in that process. That's probably the godfather of this whole industry. Is there's just not that many of them. So just thoughts on that line is, do we have the right folks in the room? Number two, a question is, would it be beneficial? During the flight standards conversation, we talked about there are so many humans involved in getting a grant or a waiver or an authorization approved that there's, I hate to use the word customer, but the user, the operator, becomes the integrator of all the answers. And so they're mitigating how that's all handled. I've seen in larger companies, and I would offer that it might be possible with the kind of corporations in this circle, that there's a challenge response system where they say, we're giving this corporate answer, and this piece of the corporation said this. Internally, is there any type of cultural, formal challenge response mechanism that says, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense? Let's double check that. Because there's so many vertical integration opportunities that we would miss if we didn't have the opportunity to say, gosh, I've been working on my piece of this and it's really humming along, but it's all hung up because these guys are doing this. And that's kind of our corporate answer. Love to see our government agencies do similar things to what corporate does. And potentially, I don't have the answer to this, if that could be a tasking that you would want corporate America to say, here's a good way to second guess yourself in a way that makes the whole organization sing a little bit.
Blanca online.
Yes, hi. I want to echo Bob's first comment, or Kent's first comment, sorry. And say I of course am here representing the AAM world, and was added to the committee in part to do that. I would love to see additional members here that represent the growth of that industry. And I would underscore that I think industry members, especially those who are moving towards certification, would be a great addition. I would also love to see, again, a representative from a state or local agency that is working to integrate AAM into a multimodal transportation system. As I think most of you know, our organization works closely with that particular stakeholder group. I can certainly represent them collectively, but I think the experience of a local state or local agency that is working on this would be invaluable to this group.
Thank you, Yolanda, for that feedback. James?
Yes, and I'm not sure if this is totally within scope, but it's sort of an issue because some of us here represent public operators, public aircraft operators. We're governments, different forms of government. And I think we may be at a point in time where we need to look at the interpretations of the PAO, how we interpret the Public Aircraft Operations Statute. I know it's the statute. We don't have a whole lot of room there, but it could be that as we get all these new entrants, is there something we should reconsider? Do we have a modern, really interpretation of PAO and how that applies? I think that could impact a lot of people here. It has been a source of, I wouldn't say confusion, but a whole lot of questions from entities as we've gotten into the new entrants in the past 5 or 10 years.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Yep.
So actually I have two thoughts. Both of them actually touch back to the earlier conversations we had. So first, we talked about task group 17 and the consensus-based standards. So just a thought, because wearing my hat as the co-chair of the ASTM F38 standards focus on UAS and AM, I think we need to look beyond domestic, just US harmonization. We really need to focus on international harmonization, because I'll tell you that our membership, the technology providers like us, they don't want to build technology that can only work in one geography. So I just wanted to, as this task group spins up, that should be our founding principle. The second comment I had was around the waiver and the exemption process that we talked about, and learning from experiences in other parts of the world. And I wanted to use an example like CASA in Australia, for example. The reason I know it is because we are involved in this. They're looking, we talked about it, I think Christian brought that up, is there a best practices thing, a standardized way, so when operators are submitting all these applications, so it's an apples to apples comparison. You're not worried about different interpretations. So creating a digital infrastructure, a digital tool that operators use and submit, whether it's using the standardized data sets and the way the different scenarios are outlined, and we walk through it. So at the end, when it comes to the FA, it's all standardized. So you cut down the timeline from 800 hours, 20 hours. So that project is already ongoing. It's a 21-month pilot project, CASA funded, EATP funded. So I'm happy to share if FA would be interested in what's happening there, but I seriously think we should definitely look at aspects like that. Thank you.
Thank you. I was thinking about Bob's comment in the first part of it about adding to the group. I think in addition to anybody that's got something certified, anybody that's got in the AAM world that's got a cert plan approved would also be really, really interesting. In some ways, that's the bigger hurdle, is getting the cert plan approved, so that we could get some valuable insight from them if they'd be willing to share.
Bob, to your first question on do we have enough AAM people in the room? Fortunately, Ed Bolin was just added to the group 2 meetings ago, and he actually in NBAA has an AAM round table, which consists of AAM manufacturers. So we may have more people now than maybe we realize. We just haven't put them to work yet on certain AAM articles. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to propose just a thought to create a task force to coordinate with the Department of Defense, especially the Air Force. The purpose for that is to have a greater focus on the opportunities to explore and leverage the public-private partnership ideas, which can benefit many parties involved in the advanced aviation. Examples such as the universities and research institutions, the DoD applications, public law enforcement and youth educations, and many other agencies like FEMA or NOAA, and small business operators, and to demonstrate the opportunities for many industries that are around us. Personally, I worked with DoD for the past 40 years, and I know, especially the Air Force, they are pretty advanced in both UAS and AAM. So I think there's things that we can learn from each other.
If I could just throw in on that. Just as a sidebar, and we absolutely agree with working with DoD and other partners and figuring out, because the collective helps, right? Just as a note, and I think we talked about this at the AAM Summit, but we are partnering with AFWERX with their investments into a number of operators' aircraft, including to grab some of their test data so that we can pull it in for our modeling and simulation work in the near term. So we're working on a memorandum of understanding and having them partner with our tech centers. So we are moving in that direction.
Just also want to mention on the integration whole of government side, we are working, and the Department of Transportation is leading this effort. Peter Ryan wasn't able to join us, or maybe he's online, but we are also having ongoing conversations across the whole of government about how we better coordinate and cooperate to facilitate integration of both the UAS and AAM. I don't know, Jeffrey, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, what I'm more or less thinking about is our AAAC committees to work with a couple of, Air Force representatives to share the ideas about AAM and UAM. That's basically.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sue. And you and I spoke, and if you could frame it up in the form of maybe potential tasking, that would be great, and we'll make sure we collect that. So thank you. David, online?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Houston. I was wondering, is there any way we can get, I think it's the Next Gen office to come in and brief us about Innovate 28 and how they're proceeding in terms of that?
Sure.
Last meeting, they gave us the first overview, which was great, but now that the implementation plan is out, Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
I can give you the broad strokes, but we'd be happy to come back and give you a longer briefing on that. So the implementation plan was issued out this summer. One of the highlights in there is a broad integration plan that looks at all the steps that the agency believes that you would have to accomplish in order to get operations at scale done. The intention there is then to go by operator location when they've sort of designated where it is that they want to go, and actually customize that implementation plan down to something that we can then work to with committed timeframes and things like that. So we've got program managers who are already assigned to some of the more advanced operators who are more advanced through the TC program, I should say, to start those pieces of it. One of the important things, we've worked with Shanetta's organization, with ABS and others, to take a look at the kinds of data that each one of our organizations are going to need in order to do our homework, individual homework there. And as part of our portfolio management function, what we're looking to do is sort of to aggregate that so that when we're asking operators for it, they're sort of getting asked once instead of 20 different times, right? And so that we can share the relevant data amongst ourselves. So I think we're at the point right now where we want to make sure that we're socializing what those data points are. For instance, you're looking at different flight profiles, downwash characteristics, things like that, which will be necessary for the vertiport ACs in the future. Right here, we need that from the aircraft operator today. We understand that this is a highly competitive environment, that people are very sensitive to where they may be in a certification process, which may influence how forthcoming they are at a particular time to share this information. But I think what we want to message is that the sooner we get to work on some of those aspects of really getting things out into the operation, the better we can meet their business objectives. If we wait until there's an aircraft TC'd and hope that we can fly the next month, that's not going to happen. So we've tried to get our ducks in a row here, and we are eagerly awaiting. We're ready, willing, able, and eager to start partnering on those pieces.
Yeah, David, great question. And I would add, and if you all haven't seen the implementation plan, I'd encourage you to check it out. It's very insightful as it lays out the certification, operations, and infrastructure or roadmap that's going to be needed to bring us about. And specifically, is think about the Olympics in LA, right, in 28. So that's not too far away. But tasking 16, and really just want to tip my hat off to Kate and Jeffrey, is really we're thinking about the Innovate 28 based on our last presentation, saying, hey, is there a tasking that the AAAC can weigh in on that is connected to Innovate 28? So that's task group 16. So that's our opportunity to start being part of that conversation. So that's not coincidental. There's an opportunity for us to participate.
And I lean heavily on 17 too, right? If we're, you're talking about the first operations flying much like a helicopter today, those will happen as they do. As you're moving towards autonomy and pieces like that, we're going to have to get into the CNS, some of the safety things in there and understanding that commonality so we can move forward here. So please consider that part of your work plan as well.
Yes, Kevin?
Yeah, every time we use the word Innovate 28, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. I know. I've given you new nomenclature. Live and Vive works as well. So two things. One is I very much would be supportive of bringing in somebody, one or two, whoever, that are the AAM front runners or working through certification. We just, to clarify, we have NDAs with over 20 AAM, UAM companies. So we're very aware of what's going on in the industry and trying to figure out how that relates to the infrastructure piece, but having them at the table, we think would be a useful addition. And, you know, we're very much supportive of all of the great things the FAA has done up to this point and look forward to bringing stuff in really in 2025 and then scaling it from there. So it's just my pet peeve. Okay, thanks.
All right, Ogiyama, online.
Hello all. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this really great meeting today. There's just a couple of points that I wanted to piggyback on that were made earlier today. I know there's been lots of conversation about getting better data. I think David brought it up around metrics. Kathy brought it up around safety data. And one of the things that I just wanted to make sure we don't lose sight of as we think about our priorities is that we are not just thinking about improving processes and the number of approvals, but that we are also thinking about the impact that those approvals have. Like, are those approvals actually supporting the industry? Are they getting the outcomes that FAA is expecting? Are we actually able to enable the types of operations that were intended? Because as these approvals come out, we just want to make sure that our operations are actually having the impacts on community that we expect, because I think that that's the number one thing that's going to help community engagement efforts, is for communities to see the benefits of these operations. I just wanted to put that out there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. How about the Vic?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks. I'll start off by saying that, there's not a person around that table around this call that doesn't deserve to be here. But I want to make sure that we don't forget that the roots of this organization was the Drone Advisory Committee. And there is a huge need for what's being discussed around here and bringing in more members and that kind of thing. But the vast majority of drone owners are the commercial and even just as importantly, the recreational folks. And this committee seems to have sort of lost its way with that particular set of drone owners. And so I'm not proposing a solution with this, but I want to make sure that we understand as a committee that we need to be careful of not losing our roots and not having those who really started this industry left in the dust. If you watch the forums, well, I do much more than I should. That's the feeling that a lot of drone owners have. A lot of the small people, a lot of the recreational people have about this committee is that we don't matter anymore. So I want to make sure that we don't feel that, and we don't put that air out in that particular manner. And then the second thing I want to bring up is, Jeffrey, I want it on the record is I'm not the one that brought up the remote ID compliance issue. So I was Kenji, I was off Kenji. I had nothing to do with that. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, Vic, thanks for the comment. And I can assure you that the AAAC, as we blended in the Drone Advisory Committee with the new users, that the charter is for both the parallel operations and certainly with the taskings, we're very mindful to ensure that we don't lose sight. So just for the committee's sake, I don't want anyone to think that we've lost that focus, because we haven't. It's just a matter of moving things through concurrently. And there is one ship that's moving really fast, and it's getting a little bit more visibility, but that doesn't mean that the others being neglected. So certainly appreciate that, Vic. Thanks for keeping us honest, and we'll certainly continue to collaborate from that perspective. Okay, Roby?
Yes, in the spirit of an earlier comment or question about collecting data, our metrics being data driven, I'm kind of curious, from an Innovate 28 perspective, if the FAA is really taking an effort to work with their European partners on what is going to happen in the Paris Olympics next year, where Volocopter has announced that they would be doing air taxi, operations. I think that may just be one, OEM that may be providing some services. But I'm kind of curious if that will be an opportunity for, basically for our community, for the U.S. community to take a look at what are the lessons that will be learned that come out of that event? Is it just going to be a one-off? Will it be something that will be a little bit more at scale? And how could those lessons be learned and absorbed for our broader community back for Innovate 28, especially on the infrastructure side, and specifically the digital infrastructure side, where there will be the need for communications, navigation, and surveillance services in a relatively complex airspace. Thank you.
I'll just say briefly that our Paris rep is working closely on the helicopter activities there to provide us feedback there. We're meeting with our Brussels counterpart who handles that whole part of the world, plus Africa, to sort of see how they're engaging with those conversations and then looking at what we need to pull back from that conversation. So I'd say embryonic, but moving.
And I just wanted to add the same thing, that my team is working with them as well on the infrastructure piece. So, yeah, I think we've got a collective effort that's happening to prepare for that.
Excellent. Thanks, Roby. And if you want to frame it up in a potential future tasking, by all means, feel free to frame it up and bring it forward. Just couch it for an opportunity in the future from an industry perspective.
Absolutely. I'll reach out to you, Houston. Thank you.
All right, Kenji.
So I'm talking from a state perspective here. There's a lot of states in the U.S. that are engaging or have engaged or looking to engage in strategic plans for AM implementation. And I was looking at Innovate 28, and one of the pieces is this document says, in addition to collaboration at the federal level, the FAA is looking to engage it with the state, tribal, local, and territorial governments. Now, it goes through a laundry list of things that will be covered. We have covered sort of the community engagement piece, and it looks like the intermodal transportation piece will be picked up in one of the new taskings. But there's some other pieces that are also need to be addressed in terms of what sort of policies need to be addressed at the state and local level to help, including for example, zoning, electrical infrastructure, what state agencies involved, really looking at where the rubber hits road, what needs to be involved. And in terms of a tasking, I'd recommend that, because there needs to be a deep dive in terms of the actual implementation, because we have the technology implementation. The Innovate 28 does a wonderful piece about that, whether it be vertiport standards, et cetera. But when you look at how to assist the legislatures, the state agencies, the territories, and the tribal governments in terms of what they need to look at in terms of what policies they need to pass, I think that's sort of missing at this point. And I think folks like Cami, Yolanka is great in terms of that. But I think as a act tasking, I think it would be very valuable to look at what needs to be done to provide other states who haven't gone through the process some assistance in terms of how to prepare each of those states to be receptive. Because if the states aren't involved, you don't have vertiport locations. So it'd be great to look at that as a future tasking as well. So thanks.
Hey, thanks, Kenji. Got a response here from Sunetta.
Kenji, thank you for saying that, because that's certainly one of the things that I was going to bring up, and I was just talking with Becky about this, because I think that's one of the critical pieces that we are missing. We don't control local zoning, local land use, and if we want any of these operations to be truly successful from a business standpoint, that has to happen. And so we've got to find a way to get into those local, either going to city council meetings, going to MPO meetings, but we have to find a way, because right now we don't have that. So I think even Ed, with your roundtable, that's been a part of the discussion, and we need to bring that out as to what the these manufacturers and operators are talking to. A lot of them are going to these jurisdictions, they're having conversation. We're not a part of those conversations, so how can we engage and sit around and come up with those policies and standards that we want them to bring forth? So I think that that's a critical piece, But how do we do that? Is that in a tasking, or is that in some of a small group and trying to find out what that looks like? But certainly, thank you for bringing that up.
I got a bit of a contrarian view. I'm not suggesting it's not important at all for the local government people sort of come and pick at my office. But I think you described it perfectly. It's absolutely critical. And from a business perspective, you go nowhere if you don't get local community support. I am concerned that we and the agency don't bite off. There's a first principles discussion here. How do you get approval to get in the air? How do you get approved? How do you create a certification path? There's a lot of work there. And I worry, and I totally agree with what you said, right? But I worry that if we don't start at first principles and actually retire those things, we're going to almost start at the end and still not have a means by which to get there. And we need the means by which to get there. I know in the organisation I represent, we have strong ties within the community. And we see that as part of our customer centricity mode to make sure we're working with them. And, frankly, if they don't want us there, we're not going to go and push that because there's a lot of the country to go and cover. But we get nowhere if we don't get the first principle stuff sorted out. And I'm worried we're going to open ourselves up to so much breadth that we lick every cookie, so to speak, and we actually consume none. And that's what I'm a bit concerned about.
The only thing I would add to that, though, David, is that what we're seeing is that for this to be truly operational, everything won't be at an airport, right?
Oh, no,
it's going to be in a
that.
community, and we've already got communities who are putting policies together to not allow this at all.
Yeah,
and so we've got to find a way to get that balance, because even if we certify aircrafts and they can't go from point A to point B, then we've kind of put ourselves in a situation. So I just think it has to kind of work together.
Yeah, it's just how that flywheel, how you get that first 10 pounds moving
Yeah.
that flywheel, and then it spins on itself. So I don't disagree, it's just how we get it moving.
Yeah.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Just because I'm sitting right next to David, I had to have a state and local perspective. Quite honestly, I don't disagree with you. I think there's a tremendous amount of harmony that has to happen. I would caution against, and we've actually heard this a couple of times, when other issues where we say from our regulator, well, until the local community zones that to protect the airspace for whatever, runway, IPZs, not the whole thing, occasionally we'll get we're not really convinced that this is the right thing to do, so that local city needs to actually engage their own zoning things. That gets a little sideways. If we can find a way to look at, are we going to authorize this? The question might be more along the lines of, is the community on board? And can they comply with the regulations? And are we in the right place so that it really is a harmonious engagement? If it is, high five, press on. If it's not, we're not probably ready yet. 3 cents.
Yeah, just 5 seconds. You hit on some things.
Let's talk about innovation.
No, don't. The reality of it is it's somewhere in the middle. I don't think this organization ought to be actively going out into the communities and imposing zoning wills that will just turn it upside down. The flip side of it is, she's absolutely right, and we as a company deal with this literally on a daily basis as we go into markets. We're going to go into those locations with the AAM OEM operators where they're leaning forward from a zoning perspective, where they're leaning forward from an operational perspective. But there is some benefit as we go through this process when we're looking not only at airports, but also at other locations that are non-traditional, that having the opportunity for the FAA to say, this is how this is going to operate, this is how we go through safety and security, because at the end of the day, fundamentally, it's overflight, it's noise, and it's safety. And you guys control 2 of those, right? So if you're supportive of 2 of those, the other is just how we deal with noise and whatever their zoning recommendations. So I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't think this ought to take over, exactly as David said, all the other things that we have, because the FAA's got plenty of meat on their plate. But I do believe that Shanetta is correct, that there is a role for them to play as we get into the communities
that they can be useful in articulating how they're going through this process, how they're certifying, how safety will be taken care of. And that will help smooth the way as we go through the rest of that.
Totally agree.
So let's go to James and we'll come to Brian. So James,
Sure, yeah,
Brian.
yeah, I'm just gonna echo kind of what the other speakers have said. I would say we would need to be careful with this one and bound it. We could very easily boil the ocean with this one. So I would say that we start out with the assumption that we're just looking at zoning authorities, maybe how communities need to prepare. What are the issues they need to think about? So similar to what other people said, I would really caution against getting too broad on a tasking like this. Limit it to something that we could probably accomplish, which what sort of interaction do the cities, communities, those that have zoning authorities, what do they need to do with FA? But I don't think we need to go beyond that because we could open up a much bigger challenge that we couldn't solve here, and I think it would derail us.
This is starting to feel like an AUVSI meeting. We've got, I think, 15 more than that at this stage, AAM players, infrastructure players, et cetera. I just want to hearken us back to the meeting early on in the Drone Advisory Committee when Ed Lee from San Francisco, God rest his soul, made the point that small UAS was turning his entire city into the airport. He used to know where the airport was down at SFO. And I remember at that time, there was an awful lot of conflict about who was not sitting at the table. And here we are, below these many years later, and things have gotten more complex. So I think it's been said a few times, but I just wanted to weigh in, and particularly what Kevin said, what David said. I think, James, I'm agreeing with you as well. We need to bound this somehow and make sure that the purpose of this committee is to take taskings from the FAA. How can we be helpful to you? And that is not to say we're potted plants here, just responding, but because sequencing is extremely important, but we're not going to solve all these problems inside of this group. As high a regard as I've got for everyone around this table, or who could additionally be added to this table, I'm concerned about boiling the ocean as well.
Thanks, Mike. Janica?
Yes, I'm just going to follow up. I'm going to echo what James said, and several of you, that this could be boiling the ocean for this committee. I think there's already good work happening, certainly with the work that Cammie's doing. Our 5th Urban Air Policy Collaborative cohort is about to start. This is our in-depth program for state and local agencies and airports on advanced air mobility that looks at all of these issues. And while I do think that there are going to be communities that are reactive, I think what we're also seeing now is the number of jurisdictions. We've had, I think, 30 different jurisdictions across the country, at state DOTs, aviation departments, local DOTs, airports, MPOs, et cetera, come through our program. And through that, we are building a body of policies and best practices that enable those jurisdictions to implement advanced air mobility in a way that makes sense for them. So I think it where it would be really valuable is to look at how FAA and its authority and its regulations intersect with the work that those local jurisdictions are doing. And so I think if we are to create a tasking out of this, I think that that's where some of those boundaries exist. I think this work is happening, and I think it's probably beyond the scope of this committee to tackle the whole piece, but there probably is a very good place to look at the intersection of what's happening at the ground level or at the local level and what's happening at FAA without derailing those first principles that David mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the risk of, I think we're all kind of in the same place. We've got 2 good taskings in front of us now. We know that there's a sequential plan here. We know we're moving through certification, we're moving into operations, then we're moving into operations at scale. A lot of this has been touched on. But while I don't think we want to boil the ocean or work backwards, I think we also want to keep seeing beyond the horizon. And as we're building this, understand where the waterfalls are on, what the foundation is. So I think we're wise to talk about what taskings we think are appropriate, the FAA to share with us what they think the challenges are. But I also, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, and we need to look at how we're unfolding this. And don't like the name, but I do like the idea. We are looking not just at starting operations, but being at scale or enabling that scale. And I think we need to make sure we've got that discipline.
Thank you. Kathy?
To say, and with a lot of what we've just been discussing, the reality is we can reach back to our community engagement tasking, because working with the jurisdictions and the communities, a lot of those best practices we've already done. And so I think that by reaching back and pulling those forward and engaging the DOTs on that front, it could make a huge difference. We just had Merlin Labs fly between 6 communities in Alaska with this autonomous Cessna Grand Caravan, and they were well received by each community because they had gone out and talked about safety and talked about what it meant and what the technology was. That whole aspect about, we're doing an FAA project. They went ahead and laid it all out, and with the State Department of Transportation support. And that foundation meant that everything worked really well. So I think we have a lot of the key pieces here for this conversation without actually having to recreate the wheel for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. So a lot of good thought leadership, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to have some open time. And the whole purpose of this discussion was just to throw it out there, right? And to your point, Ed, the intention of this discussion isn't to say what's next. It's really just to capture thoughts. And then we collate those thoughts. If you frame them up, then we'll present them to the FAA. So as they look at things from a priority perspective, they can work their way back to us. So absolutely. So a lot of good discussion. Jessica reminded me that in terms of some of the work that's going on in communities, DOT has a working group that's come together that's addressing these very issues. So, some things that we're talking about is thought leadership, right? It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to tackle it, but it's okay to throw it out there because we know in the grand scheme of things, it's something that's going to need to be addressed. I remember early on, Brian, one of the first taskings that we got from the FAA, Michael Werchter was the administrator, was the role of the federal, state, local, and tribal organizations. And it was very broad from a drone perspective, knowing that there is FAA preemption, all those things will need to be tackled at some point. And we attempted at it, and I can tell you, it fell off the water cliff. It was just way too big back in 2017. But the reality is, if we're going to get public acceptance, we're going to have education, we're going to make this industry successful, at some point all of those things are going to be addressed. And the fact that this group of executives are throwing those out there to think about is a good thing. And so, please frame up your thoughts in terms of potential taskings. If you forward those to me, I'll aggregate them, get them to the FAA for their consideration in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie as we start to close things out.
Thank you, Houston, and thank you for all of you for letting me join you today. It's been a really enlightening discussion for me. I appreciate the candor, the rigor and the passion that you bring to the debate and the discussion. I think I have about 10 pages of notes just listening to all the ideas. Particularly love how this group is very solutions oriented, practical, focused on let's get to yes. I appreciate the very candid feedback you gave us about what you like about what we're doing, what you don't like about what we're doing, because it makes us better at our job when we go back and we contemplate. You were talking about pressure testing and do we question and scrutinize? Are there ways we can do it better? Are there faster, smarter things to do? We take all that to heart. I just can't tell you how much we appreciate the wisdom and the experience that all of you bring to the discussions. I look forward to your input on the 2 taskings that we gave you today, but also look forward to your thoughtful input about next taskings and how we should think about prioritizing these. Again, with a focus on let's get to yes. So thank you all. Thank you, Houston.
All right, well, I've spoke way too much already. I'll just echo that, Katie. Thank you so much, for your leadership, Jeffrey, you and your team, and all the great work that you have done and will continue to do. Gary, you and your team that put everything together and coordinating this thing. For those of you who traveled here, thank you. For those of you who weren't able to make it, thank you for participating. We hope to see you in February. When we get together, it's always good to have the opportunity just to shake a hand and see a face. But one of the things I'm just very encouraged of, and that is the thought leadership, to Katie's point. We've got some phenomenal thought leaders here that are working collaboratively to move the industry forward. And I think we've got the opportunity to continue to do that. We'll look forward to sending out an email with the chairs, co-chairs of these new taskings. I know that you all will jump in to help us bring back great feedback to the FAA as we continue to advance things forward. So with that, I'll take a motion to close out the meeting. All right, second?
Second.
All right, everyone have a wonderful day, safe travels home, and thanks again.
Enjoy.